Good morning and welcome, everyone. So nice to see the church completely filled up. I trust that you have had a good Swedish breakfast this morning and that you have got to enjoy the very good weather we give you here on Dunse today. I hope that you are ready for a very interesting time here at the church. My name is Mikael Kristensson. I represent DSM. I live here on the island. I am a member of this church, and I am honored to be your host here today. First, some practical details. This is the place to be if you have signed up for the commercial meet. If you now in horror think that this is not what you signed up for, please see the DSM staff in the back and they will help you to the right place. In case of an emergency or if the alarm goes off, we have emergency exits here on the side here and also out on that side or in the back. And you that are sitting on the balcony, you have an emergency exit on your right. Restrooms, you will find restrooms out back and then left. And please put your cell phones on mute, okay? And if you just have to answer a text or an email, please do so in a discreet way, okay? Lunch will be served here at around 12:30 or just before, and we to be finished here around 3:30. So you will have time to visit the ships down in the harbor, and you will have time to visit the exhibition area. The big banquet dinner will start at 6 o'clock, and there will be networking before that. So just relax, sit down comfortably, and enjoy this day. This church is this year, in a month or so, celebrating its 150th anniversary. And as you know, like a spark can start a fire. What was started so many years ago by a young man, still to this day inspires men and women to be light and warmth for the society they live in. So, as a representative of this church, I do not only wish you a good day, I wish you a blessed day. And I am so happy. As a moderator today, we welcome Karin Hübinette. A big round of applause. Karin, we're so happy that you are here. You are a very experienced journalist, and you are well known from TV,
if you're old enough.
Yeah, yes, if you're old enough. We understand it before. If you TV shows and news programs. And I understand also that you are the chairman of the Institute for Media Studies, and you work in the Initiative for Future of Democracy.
That's true.
Very nice and very good that you can be here today. And you are going to lead us through this day. A big round.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. It's a great honor to be here and moderating today's conversations on both challenges and opportunities of the shipping industry. And there's so many interesting speakers here, I know, because I talked to them before. So let's start, and with no further delay, I'd like to introduce to you Andreas Carlsson, Minister of Housing and Infrastructure. Give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great honor and a pleasure for me to stand here once again. When we met 2 years ago, it was a lot of turbulence in the world, but it has definitely increased. So the value of this kind of meeting that DSM shows and gives opportunity for is, of course, highly important. And I'm glad to stay with you for 2 days this year. I was also at the exercise yesterday. Since 2023, when we met, our shared commitment and the collaboration to see progress has become instant, and we have worked very hard. But much has changed, as I said. Today's seminar will address some of the most critical topics of our time: the development of global trade, the path towards sustainability, and the essential role of shipping in national preparedness. In my speech, in the introduction of this seminar, I will touch upon the state of the current affairs and how geopolitical tensions affect trade and shipping. Secondly, I will talk about Sweden's commitment to cooperation with our allies in Europe and the IMO in the world, and how this makes us a strong voice for security, free trade, and the climate. And third and last, I will talk about my government's efforts to strengthen the competitiveness of Swedish shipping and what it means for us. Dear friends, conflicts and wars continue to shape the global landscape. It's no news for anyone in this packed church today. In some regions, they are becoming more frequent and more severe. We see governments and political leaders driving development in reverse. And for those of us in international trade and shipping, the rise of protectionism is deeply concerning. On the bright side, there are good forces at work. In times like this, it's heartening to witness the strength of collaboration. The DSM is a prime example. Here we combine practical business meetings with broader conversations about the challenges and opportunities ahead. As I said, and many of you were involved in it yesterday, it was a large exercise, the largest total defense exercise regarding shipping since the World War II yesterday. It was timely and a necessary response to the realities of our world. The backdrop may be serious, and it's of course regrettable that we need these kinds of exercise, but it's fitting that it took place here in connection with Donsö Shipping Meet. And I want to thank you all for participating, and also for the results that we would work together on different tasks after this exercise. I had the opportunity to observe the exercise first time, both here in the church with some of the tabletops, but also out on Mercurius, where I could see firsthand how it works with the police and the defense working side by side. It was a powerful demonstration of capability and coordination. Shipping is vulnerable of disruptions. I don't need to stay there too long, but I can just mention COVID-19, Ever Given, the war in Ukraine. It has shocked the shipping sector, not just the shipping sector, but it of course affects our flows. And for Sweden, a country where 90% of our foreign trade go by sea, it is of course something that shocks and hits us hard. Industries like steel and iron ore in Luleå, paper and pulp along the coast, and vehicle production in Gothenburg all faced rising costs and delays. In stores, consumers saw how everything from building materials to electronics arrived late and at a higher price. Together, these crises have shown that shipping is vulnerable not only to economic shifts, but also to pandemics, accidents, and wars. Building more resilient supply chains, strengthening key ports like Gothenburg, I'm sure we will hear more about that, Göran, later, and investing in alternative routes and green technologies is essential for the future. Global trade will always depend on the sea, but it also must be ready for the next storm. The Swedish government has been working very hard to strengthening the competitiveness in the shipping sector. I will come to that, but also I said the second part of the speech would be that we are not alone. We are working really hard, both in the EU context, but also in IMO. Sweden's commitment for the IMO is long-standing and unwavering. We take our role seriously, and we are actively engaged in different relevant committees and working also closely with the sector. So I want to thank you for the good cooperation in this sense as well. As you know, we are running for re-election for the council for 27 to 28. I will personally be involved in the campaign, and I count on your support for Sweden to have a strong voice in IMO also for the future. Talking about the IMO, I must mention this past April marked a significant milestone. The international community approved a new instrument of green transition of shipping, the IMO Net Zero Framework. One of the fortunes with this is that it sends a clear message: pioneers will not be left behind. Companies investing in zero and net zero or near zero emissions fuels will be supported. This is a moment of opportunity, and Swedish innovators are already positioned to lead. I witnessed some of those good examples actually last week. I was in Landskrona when Oceanbird showed their wind sail for the very first time. We're also taking part of the news from Furutank and the initiative launching a company to trade emission reductions on shipping, where Fuel EU maritime legislation opened up a way, and Furutank is leading the way. I can continue, and I know different companies in the room are actually leading in their sphere, so I think I need to stop, or else my time, I see, is already almost done here. So I will stop there, but I want to thank you all for leading the way. I'm proud, as I said, as a Minister of Shipping, which of course in infrastructure and transportation includes shipping. So I am the Minister of Shipping, and I'm proud as Minister of Shipping that we have a cutting-edge shipping industry leading the way. And just mentioned 2 examples for you this morning, or this lunchtime already, but we say morning. It's English. Morning is always later in international context, I've learned. Talking something, and you already heard me, I hope you heard me in the tent later, the electricity went down, so I used my strong voice to highlight the steps we have been taking to strengthening the competitiveness, abolishing the tax for mortgages, and that's of course very important. We have already set steps that take place when we remove the stamp duty. I'm really happy to cooperate with the sector. Good news from the Donse industry, of course, and also Stena this summer, Wallenius we read about yesterday. But we are not done yet. We need to do more. We need to at least double the Swedish shipping fleet from 100 to 200, and we also need to have a more diverse shipping fleet. So we are, of course, has a strong sector in itself. It's good. It's good. It creates jobs, it strengthens wealth, and also gives opportunities for students to go out and learn in first hand at the cutting-edge shipping industry in Sweden. So a strong sector is a good sector, but it's also very important for us when it comes to preparedness. So stamp duty, we will have a bareboat register in place in the beginning of next year, which I know is very important for you. You've been waiting for it quite long, but this government is delivering. We are also working to improve the Swedish tonnage tax system. Several enhancements are underway to ensure that our system is on par with those of our neighbors. We'll need to level the playing field, and that's what we are working with you closely. So I just want to thank you for your commitment, and we are not just investing in the regulation and the tax system, we also need to invest in people to see more seafarers at the Swedish flagged ships. It's not just about economics, and it's not just about competitiveness, it's also something about pride. I was thinking about the Swedish flag, and I was also thinking about the Argentinian football team, Boca Junior. Boca Junior play in yellow-blue shirts, and it's inspired by the colors of the Swedish flag flown by a merchant ship by Buenos Aires harbor back in 1906. I heard that they said that next ship that will come, the flag, we will show those colors of the flag. And it happened to be a Swedish flag that came in, and then Boca Junior, one of the most popular clubs in Argentina, shows the yellow and blue flag. Why am I talking about this? Because I think it's something about our history. We have a strong history in Sweden when it comes to shipping. We can be proud of it, not just because Boca Junior plays in yellow and blue, but I'm equally convinced that the Swedish shipping has a bright future as we have a strong history. And that will not come by itself. It comes when we meet, when we work together, when we level the playing field, give good conditions for shipping in Sweden under the Swedish flag. And that's why I have made it to one of my priorities as Minister for Shipping, as Minister for Infrastructure, to strengthening the Swedish shipping sector. And it's of course come naturally as a Christian Democrat, but it's also something that we have been working with constantly as the government, and it has also of course strengthened by the geopolitical situation where even more people have understood the need of a strong shipping sector in Sweden. So I'm proud of what we have achieved. We have sent a clear and consistent signal, but we are not done yet. We need to continue, and that's why I'm here to work together with you and spend 2 days with a lot of meetings working together with you. I really want to say, to sum up, that I appreciate your hard work, and we can work together on this. Nothing could be more important, I think, when talking about shipping, that we double the fleet, that we strengthen the competitiveness, we have more seafarers, so we can stand with the history in our back, but also aiming for an even brighter future. So thank you very much for your contribution, taking your time to be here at DSM this year. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to say that when speaking with actors from the shipping industry, they're rather happy about the way politicians have finally understand the importance of the shipping industry.
Yeah.
Have you all been a bit slow there?
I will not speak for the former governments. I will speak for my government. We have had speed from the first day. But I remember 2 years ago, I think David Christensen, where are you? David Christensen, he just came up after I've spoken here, and he said, we have heard that before, we have good words, and we now want to see results. And I say, I will come back in 2 years, and then you will see results, what we have achieved. And that's why I say that I'm proud, but not satisfied, but I'm proud that we have actually delivered to what you in this room has asked for a very long time. And one of you also said that this happened more than in 3 years than in the 3 last terms. But we're not done yet. We still have the pace and the aim to strengthen the shipping in Sweden.
Speaking about, you were speaking about competitiveness and innovation. And it's no secret that the EU is lacking behind, especially when it comes to vital technology, which is absolutely super important for the green transition and for keeping our competitiveness at a high level. How worried are you that China and US will still be the main supplier and we will still be ever so dependent as today?
Yeah, of course, it's worrying, and it's no doubt that we need to speed up when it comes to legislation and regulation in the EU context. And strengthening competitiveness in EU was one of our cornerstones for the program, when Swedish held the presidency of the Council. And I'm happy that that had been the priority for the presidents after us, but also for the new Commission. But now also we need, of course, to go from words to action in that sense. And I'm happy that Sweden government, also together with the industry, are leading the way here and pushing the limits, so we actually can speed up and also have a more investment environment friendly environment in Europe. And hopefully, and I'm sure with the regulation in place now, it also open up the way for innovator and the innovative shipping industry to lead the way and also make business out of it, because then I think we get a strength in the transition.
And going from words to actions, what would you say are the most important political decisions that are being debated or hopefully coming into place right now?
Yeah, but first, I think we need to start where we are and actually strengthening the competitiveness where we actually see different bottlenecks, and that's what we started with in the Swedish government. We had the stamp duty, we had the tonnage tax system that needed to be revised, and also a bareboat charter that other countries, other flag states has, but not Sweden. So we need to level the playing field, and then we have the ground for taking the next step. And I don't think that every time it's the best way to ask the politician what will be the next step, but actually ask the industry, the sector, what do you see and how can we cooperate to give you the prerequisites to actually achieve that. And that's why I think it's so important to work hand in hand with government and the different authorities. Been here at the exercise yesterday as well. It's a good example of how we can work together, and I think you can adopt that approach even when it comes to how to be more competitive.
So for you to do good work, this dialogue has to continue.
Yeah, I'm happy to say it will continue.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you know he'll fulfill all your dreams. Just come with your wish list.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And I will ask you quite direct questions as well, because now it's time for you to deliver, and we already see that. We see more Swedish flag ships taking place, but it will not be me that flag in. That is not that's a decision for you guys, but I can work with the conditions that will level the playing field. So we need to work together on this.
Yeah,
And
I think they'll get in touch with you.
Perfect.
Thank
They
you
already
so
are.
much.
Thank you very much,
Andreas
Karin.
Karlsson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's nice to hear a dialogue with politicians actually working well. Someone is eager to hear what you think is necessary for the future. And speaking about the future, there is a range of challenges within the industry right now, as you well know. From the competition that we just spoke about, to digitalization, sustainability requirements, and on top of that, an erratic president in the White House threatening the world with new tariffs almost every second day. So how does this changing world impact the shipping industry? Is there a way to turn challenges into opportunities, and what's needed then? And what is needed from the EU to support and secure global trade competitiveness and innovation? Here to discuss these matters are Robert Uggla, Chair of Board, Maersk, and you can just spontaneously give him a hand while coming up. And Anna Stellinger, Deputy Director General, International and EU Affairs at the Confederation of Swedish Enterprises. Annika Hult, Deputy CEO, Stena. And Göran Eriksson, CEO, Port of Gothenburg. There's nothing like a spontaneous applause, don't you say? So, very welcome. I'd like to start with you, Anna. You are following the moves and the statements from the White House at almost a daily basis. What is the latest on trade and tariffs, would you say?
Well, I think it's fair to say that we live in exceptional times. We wake up almost every morning with something new, not necessarily something positive. And if we look at just the last 2-3 days, it's quite exceptional. We have seen how the deal that was reached between the US and the EU has already been breached by President Trump.
That was fast.
We had a deal on July 27th, but since we've seen only the 2 last days that he has broadened the scope of tariffs on steel and aluminum. You know, they're 50%, but also put on the table the question of digital taxes. So that's one thing. And if that was not enough, we have also seen the federal courts in the United States now deciding that the President Trump does not have the mandate and the power to decide on the tariffs that he has already decided upon. So this will probably go to the Supreme Court, and we don't know if the tariffs will remain. And then lastly, yesterday, I guess you also pictures, because saw all the pictures in the newspapers, Donald Trump and the US is not the entire world. There are other actors as well. And I guess you saw the pictures of a very cozy gathering with the President Modi from India, the President Xi from China, and President Putin of Russia, also declaring that they want to break with the current international system and create an alternative one.
Could one say that we are entering a total new era when it comes to geopolitics and trade?
I think it's fair to say that we are entering into something new. We don't know what it is yet. And behind all these daily news that we see, something bigger is going on. And without being too lengthy about it, I think we can all agree that what we have seen since basically World War II, building up a global system built on rule of law, a rules-based system. We have the United Nations, the Bretton Woods institutions. We have what became the World Trade Organization. We have gone towards more cooperation, more trade, lower tariffs. It hasn't been perfect. Lower tariffs, and generally a historical direction towards more trade and more economic ties across borders. And this is now being severely challenged.
Thank you, Anna, for giving us such a good ground to stand on. Robert, would you say that these sort of wobbling situation right now, has it influenced your shipping operations yet?
So the first tariffs of the Trump administration came already during his first term, and I was in China at the time when they were announced, and we've seen significant growth in trade since 2016, and we continue to see growth. On the containerized side, we had, I think, around 4% year-on-year volume growth. So it's very difficult to see it in the numbers. We've had negative volume growth in the US, but that's likely not related to the tariffs. So it's still too early to say that this is having to what extent this is having an impact on trade. It will, of course, have a major impact, but as of now, we continue to see fairly strong volumes, globally speaking. It's important to keep in mind that the US is only part of the global trade system. So as long as most of these tariffs are linked to the US, it will have a limited impact on our global operations.
Annika, have you seen any consequences for Stena this far?
I think we've seen indirect consequences. For example, you and I as consumers are maybe a little bit more hesitant, which impacts some of our more consumer-focused businesses. But otherwise, I wouldn't say to a large extent that we've seen it impacting we are a conglomerate, we have different types of not just shipping, but other businesses as well. And we try not to steer on the headlines, but really run a lot of scenarios, including we have operations in the US. What could the impact be for that? But to answer your question, not any immediate impact as such yet. No.
And from the port perspective, Göran, have you noticed any changes connected to this bubbling surrounding world?
Not yet. And we also have to keep in mind that the volumes, US volumes through the Port of Gothenburg isn't that great, really. Our main trading partners, we find them in Asia. So looking at our numbers, we have had great numbers for the first half of this year, and we can't see any sign of a decline in the trade currently.
I was curious to know if there is anything could there be something positive coming out of this? What would you say, Anna?
Well, I think you make a very good point here, Robert, that the US is just one market, and as long as the others don't follow along, this could be limited. And, it's hard to look at the silver lining or the positives with what's going on with Donald Trump, but there are two things that I think we need to keep in mind. US stands for 9% of our exports in goods. 91% of Swedish exports in goods go elsewhere. And currently, the European Union, who has been seen as a little bit boring, perhaps slow, but predictable, transparent, we respect agreements and deals, we have become much more attractive as a partner for free trade agreements. India is speeding up negotiations with the EU because Trump is not an alternative. Indonesia, big country, is speeding up. We have the Mercosur countries with Brazil and Argentina. So the rest of the world is actually seeing the European Union in a different light. But second thing too, so probably we could become a more global actor in trade. But a second point too is that we have been a little bit sloppy in Europe. We have not been working, as the minister said, on our own competitiveness.
Let's get back to that, because I'm curious to hear if you also see possibilities now, at least maybe in the short run. What would you say, Robert?
So I'm in a room full of shipping people, and I think most shipping people appreciate that during a shorter time period, disruption may actually positive an industry like ours positively. We're in the business of helping clients with the supply chains. And I think as soon as you have some dislocation in the supply chain, there's an opportunity for people like us. So if you have a more shorter-term perspective, there are plenty of opportunities, and you can also see that in the freight market.
So you like this bubbling times?
So I think for us it represents an interesting opportunity to engage with clients and help clients, and I think also on the freight rate side you've seen some positive developments, but I think longer term it undermines the economy, and it's not good for our clients. I think, you know, if you look at disruption today, there are so many different categories, and the minister referred to it. But of course, you have military conflicts and asymmetrical warfare, like in Red Sea, and then you have climate change, which is also starting to have quite significant disruption. You saw that in the Panama Canal, where we had drought levels a few years ago. And then you have these economic policies, and they all, I think, make life quite difficult for some of what we call the BCOs, the beneficiary cargo owners, who try to understand how to source their goods from other parts of the world. And I mean, we see that as an obvious opportunity for us. But it's of course not good that the cost of goods will go up over time. That means consumption will go down, and you will have more muted economic activity, and that will ultimately impact our industry.
Annika, do you agree that in the short term there may be opportunities?
Absolutely, and we've seen that. Disruption is not a negative in the short term for a number of our shipping operations, definitely. But I agree with what Robert was saying, long term. I mean, we believe in free trade. And of course, if you are structurally limiting that and also seeing a certain more of protectionism is not necessarily a good thing. But again, shipping is amazing, and it finds its ways. And definitely if you look at, for example, oil and certain types of cargo that we are also transporting.
And if the secondary impact, if one could talk about that, it's a thing that could sort of be a risk for free trade globally. Apart from this first part, that could bring opportunities, do you see it's like a sort of a second impact that would be quite risky?
But that is not, without knowing, but I would assume it would be more impacting your business, being in the container business, which we are not, that could have. Whereas a lot of our more short sea is within Europe primarily and with the UK. But again, it comes back to, and Anna is the expert at that, how our economy is doing, what are the consequential damages that there might be, but also who stands up, who picks up the torch and really see this as an opportunity also as a country, and how can we help within that. And again, shipping it's vital, and people tend to forget that. And you talk about being part of the supply chain. Well, I would say that we are the supply chain. If there's no shipping, it stops, and that's a fact. So, and I think people are being reminded of that. So where can we fit in within that, and how can we capitalize on that and work with partners? I think it's interesting questions to address.
And ports, do they also appreciate disruptive times and find opportunities?
Of course, I mean, we are there to help, just like Robert said, to help the customers and cargo owners to find the best possible solution. I think given the geopolitical situation, we have to be more, build resilience in the transport industry. And it's not only about shipping, it's also the interface to the land infrastructure and build roads and railways that can support overseas transports as well. So I think we have a job to do. And we have also an opportunity within European Union to shape up and be more less dependent on others, you can say, or spread your eggs to more baskets.
That's interesting, because sometimes we focus to some extreme extent on everything that happens in the US. And now Göran is talking about opportunities in the EU. Do you agree? Do we spend too much time sort of analyzing the last step from the White House?
So I fully agree. I think there's an obsessiveness in Europe in general to point fingers at the US and debate and dwell all the problems you have in the US. And I think we should spend more effort trying to address the problems we have in Europe. I mean, the US economy has grown rapidly over the last 20 years. It's outgrown Europe. You also see a much stronger defense sector in the US, and of course they have a very strong energy sector. I think Europe has become the world's biggest import market for LNG. That's good for some people in the room, but it represents a major challenge from an industrial point of view in Europe. So we have a number of significant challenges in Europe, and I really believe we need to spend more time debating those challenges and hopefully also seeing a media being more focused on Europe's challenges as opposed to being obsessed about Donald Trump. These container volumes I mentioned before are quite interesting, because if you look at the the volume growth from Asia into Europe over the last few years has been around 7% per year. So very, very strong growth from Asia into Europe. At the same time, the GDP growth in Europe has been very low, depending how what you include in Europe, I think around 1%. So how is that you have a fairly weak economy in Europe, and at the same time you see significant exports into Europe? And I believe that's because of the competitiveness of especially China, but also some other countries in Asia. And of course, I see it when I go out in Asia, when we build new terminals in Asia. There's a degree of competitiveness you see in Asia, which you don't have in Europe. So I think it's a fundamental challenge that you see China and some other countries gaining market share year on year vis-a-vis Europe. Now, from a shipping point of view, we're of course happy to transport the goods. But as a European, I'm quite concerned that China's and some of these other countries' market share keeps going up. And we see more and more empty containers going back. So it's always been an imbalanced flow. It used to be 1 to 2. I think now it's 1 to 4. So Europe is unable to step up and grow its industrial sector. And that's very clear when we look at the container flows.
What do you say, Anna? The EU is unable to step up in this matter. It's rather a harsh description. Do you agree?
Well, I think it's a fair point, and I think the minister brought it up as well on competitiveness. And I would say that the tricky thing about Europe is that we lag behind when it comes to innovation. We lag behind when it comes to investment. We need to do more research. We need to secure our energy supply. We have been very heavy-handed when it comes to rules and regulations. Great ambitions, but we make it so hard for us. And I think it's also quite annoying in a sense, because we don't need, Xi Jinping is not doing this to us. Donald Trump is not doing this to us. Vladimir Putin is not doing this to us. We ourselves are putting too many obstacles to the European economy. So of course we need to unleash the European competitiveness. Of course we need to invest more. Of course we want to make it much more easy for companies to be born in Europe, to grow in Europe, and to choose to stay in Europe and export to the rest of the world. And this is not rocket science. We've had so many reports from Mario Draghi, from Enrico Letta, we have from the Commission itself, but it needs to be done. And that's perhaps one of the things where we can be grateful to those leaders outside of the world, Donald Trump or the others, that they're finally pushing us to action. We know what should be done, but it's been lacking European political leadership.
So thanks to Donald Trump, finally slow EU is moving. Do you agree with this description as well, Annika, of the EU?
Well, I thought it would be nice, actually, if we bring it back to what we heard before, and also Sweden here, and you talk about leadership. I think Sweden also politically can definitely be a role model and show leadership in here by looking at shipping and what you've done. There were, for many years, there were talks. And we as an industry were also saying, this is what we need, and it was listened to, but nothing was ever done. And we heard the minister before, and we can just validate that we are seeing those actions coming through, just getting back into being a level playing field. But how can we further strengthen our competitiveness as a sector, and doing it together? So how can we leverage on that in Brussels, for example, or in other industries? I think the role for us now is you've done a lot. We now need to step up, just like the minister was calling us to do, and we fully agree with that. And I think this, again, this more pragmatic, collaborative approach and looking what needs to be done, how can we do that in a sensible and also financially sustainable way, I think is great. So how can we have more of that also in Brussels?
Do you have any concrete ideas? In what way could you as an industry step up? What is in your own hand?
No, but I think, when you ask for something and you get it, then you need to also follow through with, unless there are other reasons against it. And we're not here necessarily to talk about Stena, but we are flagging in our Suezmaxes, for example. We're now getting the prerequisites to be able to do that. Unlike before. And of course, it's not just about the flag itself. It comes back to what we heard before about security, about making sure that seafarers see that potential for a career, or young kids to choose the maritime pathway and so on. But it was difficult for us to justify doing that before, and now we're getting there, and there are more steps to come. and we will evaluate and see how we can apply on that. But I think a lot of it is really about rolling up your sleeves, about really focusing, need to have, not nice to have, also in terms of regulation. Don't duplicate, keep it simple. What are you trying to achieve? That type of dialogue is what I think is needed. And I think if there's no sense of urgency now with everything going on, then we have definitely a challenge as well, also politically.
Anna, you want to come in, please?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point because when you go to Brussels, you talk to the institutions, the European Commission, the European Parliament, but also the organizations there. I have never experienced during the years I've been working on EU affairs that there has been such a big will to listen to companies, businesses and industries. There's a realization now from the Commission and the European Parliament that there's been too much legislation, it's been overlapping, it's been complicated, it's been detailed, and there's a realization that we need to help our companies and to make it easier, and we need to push competitiveness.
Do you see
So
that
it's
happening
easier.
now?
Yeah, I see that. It's so much easier now to get the meetings you want with high-level politicians in Brussels and go there and not just say we need to do more and we need to do better, but be very precise. This is the way that we can play a role in making Europe more competitive. There's the ears are so much bigger and the will to do better as Europe in this geopolitically very challenging world is so much higher than I have ever seen during at least 10, 15, 20 years.
That's so positive to hear. Göran, what do you think about this? Annika's into rolling up the sleeves and stepping up.
I would like to revert back to you mentioned about the energy transition, which is, of course, a very important thing for the transport sector as a whole, but also for shipping industry as well. We have been dependent on fossil fuels from faraway countries for as long as we remember, and I think we have a window of opportunity to be less dependent on others and be more self-sufficient in terms of producing fuel within European Union, and that, of course, to get back to the EU side, requires a lot of support in different kind of supports. It could be different, less bureaucracy, clear guidelines on how this should be done, and financial support, of course, to make it happen within European Union. So I don't think we should lose this opportunity when it comes to renewable fuel production within EU, which is a cornerstone in the transport sector as well.
Anna is talking about an EU more eager to listen, with bigger ears, more actually maybe even devoted to get rid of some of the bureaucracy. Do you also see these sort of new shifts? Do you find the EU more interesting or interested in listening?
I could agree to that, yes. We have had, I was attending a conference early this year in April with the EU Commissioner. Tzitzikostas is responsible for the new EU port strategy, and we had good discussions about that. Everything from military mobility to resilience and robustness of the European transport network in general, especially when it comes to shipping and to port readiness to handle. It's a structural change happening, so I'm very optimistic about what comes out of EU early next year. So that's when the new port strategy will be delivered. So I think, yes, I agree to that. Commissioners are willing to listen, and they are very interested also from the Parliament.
Robert.
So I think if the question is, how do we drive competitiveness, and I think one should be careful to not just seek the solution in Brussels. So I do think it's absolutely fair to call out, how many people do we have in Brussels, and how do we deregulate the EU? And I still don't understand how many people actually works for the Commission. I believe it's around 50,000 people, but I've never received a straight answer on that question. So I think there's clearly a quest on sort of deregulating and simplifying part of EU. But my experience being in one of the Scandinavian countries is that there is also a tendency in some of the countries in the EU, not least in the Nordics, to come with additional rules or stricter interpretation. And I've been quite involved in some of the discussions around the FSA in Denmark, which is of course very different from shipping, but it's very clear that the local or national rules go beyond the EU rules. So of course part of the solution is to simplify the EU, but I do think we can also spend time understanding how do we deregulate some of the sectors in the national countries if we want to drive competitiveness.
So we can act here in Sweden more than we do today. Is that what you're saying?
So I live in Denmark, and I'm by no far an expert on the opportunities we have in Sweden to deregulate certain sectors, but I'm sure that there must be a significant opportunity. At least I spent some time looking at the financial sector, and in that respect, there's a lot to be done if we really want to drive increased productivity and I think be more successful globally in that area.
It's often said that Sweden are the best, or one of the best, following new EU regulations, would never really challenge them at all. Is it true?
Well, I keep saying to politicians, I don't think I need to say it to Andreas here, but being super ambitious in over-implementing regulation is not being the best in the class. Because when we have the European Union, we have 27 countries with the same rules. You can put a good on the market and it can move freely. You can put a service and it can move freely. And that's what Europe is all about. 450 million consumers and one simple set of rules when it works. But then you have countries who sometimes want to be the best pupil in the class and over-implement or put extra additionals.
Or not challenging, not trying if this regulation was the best, or could we maybe...
But then again, we will have 27 different regulations and try to put a good on the market and adapt to 27 different set of rules. So being the best in the class is actually destroying the European single market. We should not under-implement, we should not over-implement, we should just do our job. And finally, this is really in focus currently in Brussels. The Commission just put a strategy for the single market on the table, a good strategy. But the problem is that then we have countries, my old former home country, France, for instance, but we are good in Sweden at this also, in other countries, Germany, Spain, adding extra rules or changing bits and pieces to the regulation, and then trying to do well, we just destroy the entire market. So we should just be better Europeans when we can, be proud to be Swedes, but not over-implement and gold plate.
Did you? Yeah, he got that. Good.
I think Andreas agrees.
Yeah, keeping notes. I can see from here. Great. That's what the dialogue is all about. Do you agree, Annika, that we're over-implementing regulations?
Well, I think if we bring it back to shipping, I think it is important just to remind ourselves, and I guess, I'm preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Bravo. Yeah, that was a good one, huh? I'm from Gothenburg, so... Anyway, no, but 90% of the goods are being transported globally by shipping. Some say 80%, some say 90%, but a majority. About 40% of the global merchant fleet is European. That's a huge strategic asset. So rather than just focus, if we look at our sector, what do we need to be competitive? Well, we're getting a lot of it, but how do we make sure we don't, end up in this stapling or putting regulations on top of regulations? If there is an issue that needs to be regulated, because that's question number one, then there should be one rule. So we should really look at smart regulation and not duplication. But what that also means is now, I know Thomas, I'm sure, going to talk about that later on about ICS, IMO, and October's vote. If there is a global fuel standard being implemented, EU needs to remove its other ones. We cannot have it on top of it. Talking about being the brave kids, globally, that we are. If we're going to be competing and doing great things also on a global market, we need to be having a level playing field on that particular market as well. So I think this is something in our near term where we need to really, really watch out when it comes to regulations as well, and to create that kind of level, not just level playing field, but competitive edge and the prerequisites for that.
And apart from legislation and not double regulation, as you said, and the bureaucracy, what would you say are the key sort of cornerstones to continue to have or maybe even make the shipping industry in Europe even more competitive? What are the absolute most important issues here?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to us. It comes down to people. Of course, you need to make sure you have funds, and we need to look at how can we scale up, not just innovate, but really scale up on fuel, on shore power connection, if you're looking at the green transition and initiatives. But again, if we're going to be successful, we've been around for more than 39 when the company was founded. We intend to be around for a long, long time. It comes back to people, how we are continuously improving, how we are being entrepreneurs, delegated businessmanship and so on. How do we attract people into shipping, wanting to see that as a pathway, as I mentioned earlier on. And that's not just for the benefit of shipping, it's actually for all kinds of industries. And yes, we talk a lot about AI and digital, and we need that. There's no doubt about that. That's one key to our future. But it's really about, I mean, we want seafarers in our offices, you know, working on our technical projects. They're great assets also for other industries. And I'm not sure it is really being looked at like that. I mean, you are in complex environments and you're solving matters and you have safety and you have to show leadership. Those are amazing qualities for anyone you want to hire. So I think there needs to be there's a lot of potential and positive within that. But that's also why we need to work together.
And this challenge to attract people to this business, seafarers of the future, how big an issue is that for you?
I think we have a seafarer among us.
Yeah.
Former
Yes.
captain.
He's gone ashore, though.
Yeah, he decided to just take a step ashore. So I would say it's more an anecdote, but maybe 10 years ago, most people had limited interest in our industry. At least if you went to a cocktail party, you know, it's not that people from outside the industry had a great interest to talk about shipping. But that really changed, I think, with COVID. I think from COVID onwards, at least I've noticed a big difference that there is a...
You're invited to the parties now?
There's a significant interest in global supply chains, and not just from friends, but certainly also in most corporations. So supply chain matters before COVID was typically, if you're a Procter & Gamble or one of these large FMCG businesses, that was typically delegated to your COO or some other person part of the executive team handling supply chain matters. And at least it's my impression now that most CEOs have a strong view on supply chains and questions like dual sourcing or moving out of China. So I think the industry has always been interesting, but I think from a recruitment point of view, it's in many ways easier now to get people interested in what we're doing.
And what do you say, Aaron, as an old seafarer, the competence question, how big a challenge is that, do you think?
I think it's a challenge currently, and we need to increase the interest to become a seafarer or working within the shipping industry in general. I think we can do a much better job as an industry to promote the industry, and I think also we as a port, the port community, we can do much better in terms of explaining that we are an integrated part of the society, and it's very important. We are shipping and the ports quite invisible or to consumers in general. So I think we can do a much better job to make ourselves more interesting, and it's only when there are negative events like the grounding in the Suez Canal a couple of years back and things like that. That's when people realize that there is shipping actually. But I think we can do much better to promote our industry, and in that way attract more people to become shipping people. Yeah.
We touched the green transition, and we're actually going to talk about that in depth in the next panel. But I'd like to get a short input from you once you're here. So starting with you, Göran, the green transition, of course, comes with investments. And we talked quite a bit about this, the economic situation of today, quite wobbly, unsecure. What do you say from your perspective? How does that influence the investments? Are you sort of slowing down, awaiting what's happening, or is it full speed ahead?
I think when I speak to cargo owners and customers of the port, there is a great interest in the green transition, and it's a slow process, of course, but there is an interest in this, and I think it's about our competitiveness as Europeans, as Swedes, to lead that development. We do our part in the port, but it's all about collaboration. We collaborate with various shipping lines on certain projects, and also with the industry. We have Volvo and we have Scania and others that we work actively with to electrify the land transportation, but also for sectors that are more difficult to electrify, like shipping and aviation. Other solutions are required. So more innovation is required, and I think we can do more there. We need to work more in clusters and collaborate across different industries.
Sometimes in these transitions, the situation could be described as a catch-22. When do we have a secure demand, or when do you have the supply? Do you find yourself in that sort of discussions as well?
Yeah, so the discussion is all around the price gap between traditional fuels and the fuels of the future, so to speak, and the price difference could be 5 times as expensive, and of course it's difficult, it's a challenge to make a business case out of that, of course. Other transitions historically has been about making things more efficient, cheaper, move faster, whatever it has been. This time we are trying to make the world a better place, and it comes at a price. And the different factors behind that. So we need to be committed, stay firm, work together, and we'll get there. And that will strengthen our competitiveness in Europe if we can lead that kind of innovation and energy transition from...
But to do the transition needed in the harbor, do you have all the clear signals that you need, or are you also waiting for the industry? And
no, we are doing steps ourselves, but we can also see partners around in the port. For instance, there is a liquefaction plant coming up, which will allow tankers and other ships to fuel biomethane, bio-LNG, which is a very good solution, a way forward. Bio is not the solution to the complete energy transition, of course, but it's one step in the right direction. So small investments like that, or small is quite a big investment actually, but we need to take those steps together. And I know from Maersk's side, they're doing fantastic things. They're having a feeder vessel coming to Gothenburg on a regular basis, fueled by methanol, and Stena is also using methanol for one of their ships. So we're doing steps and we're learning from that, and we need to scale that up to the next level. We need to meet that point where production and demand is in harmony.
Yeah.
But we are not yet there.
And what do you say, Robert, the balance between doing the investments necessary to keep up the green transition and still stay competitive? How difficult a task is that?
It's a very difficult task, and it's a good question. I would like to point out, I mean, people in this room know this, of course, but the maritime industry is very broad and very deep, and the business case for the energy transition varies depending on where you are in the supply chain. So I would argue, I mean, we're having a very good dialogue with the port here in Gothenburg, who's very sort of forward-leaning. I would argue that electrifying ports makes sense in most parts of the world. We started doing it in some ports in the world. It takes massive investments, but it's a very strong business case, and you can automate part of the port if you do it. So I think there's a strong rationale, just from an economic point of view, to electrify, if you may, decarbonize part of the port. I have others here who have a better understanding for ferries and short sea shipping, I do believe when it comes to tugs, etc., those will be electrified over time, and because the cost of the batteries are going down so dramatically. But there's no doubt for ocean shipping, it's very difficult to see within the coming decades that you will start electrifying, a big part of this merchant fleet. And here you need alternative fuels. And then the big question is, of course, what are the pathways and what are willing to pay for them? It's my understanding, having engaged with many clients on this, there are very few clients willing to pay for it. There are some, but more than 90% are not willing to pay a green premium.
And then it won't happen, I guess.
So then we've seen transitions in the past from high sulfur fuels, etc. So it's not, we have IMO in shipping. It's been a very powerful organization in the sense that we've been able to change standards because we have IMO. I think the risk we see now with the US administration is that if IMO takes, implements a decision which is on the table, assuming 2/3 back this decision, then the US and a few other countries may try to undermine IMO, and that would be terrible. We don't know if IMO will implement it. But I think just talking about the fuel pathways, just to have some historic perspective here, it's important to highlight that it takes time. So we built our first ship with a diesel engine in 1919. So my grandfather always talked about motor ships. He never said ships, he always said motor ships. And it dawned on me, I say EVs. I'm sure next generation will not say EVs, they will just say cars. But it took 30 years before we bought the last ship with a steam engine. So that transition took more than 30 years for our company. And here we had two pathways. We had the diesel engine and we had the steam engine. And my great-grandfather was a strong believer in the steam engine. He didn't believe in the diesel engine. And I think, you will see in the next 30 years, you will have competing technologies. And it remains to be seen what are the different pathways. But unless you have a real regulatory push, this will not happen in ocean shipping. I think it will happen in short sea shipping over time. I think it will happen in the ports because there's a really strong economic case for it. But it will not happen in ocean shipping unless you have a global regulatory framework. Not EU, but IMO.
So Annika, what do you say? Is it easier from your branch in the shipping industry?
Well, again, different types of shipping because we also have deep sea shipping. So that is very much in line with what Robert was describing. If you look at the short seas of the ferries, for example, yes, they make excellent cases for electrifying. Of course, again, willingness to pay from customers, but not only that, it's also the infrastructure around, charging abilities in ports and so on, and the cost of technology is coming down. So obviously we are looking at that and we have certain thoughts on that, but again, even if we would build a ship today, it wouldn't be able to charge fully in the port. But one of our companies is building also for other operations. We have larger battery packs so that you can maneuver and you can do certain things. So it's happening and we're working on that. But the charging aspect is really important, and not just that you have a plug that you can plug into the ship, but the vast amount of electricity required in order to really power these ships as well for the distances, because we're not talking about little ferries across the river. I mean, we're talking about ferries that also carry trucks and cars and people, of course, so that requires a lot of infrastructure as well, and that's where also collaboration and where investments are needed as well, and looking at Andreas, of course, here now. So I think that is, but it is a mixed picture, and I think what we really focus on is, of course, again, what can you do? The best is if you don't even use the energy. Continuous improvements is amazing what you can find, and some of the business cases for technical adjustments may look better now than they did 5 years ago, and 5 years from now the return on it makes more sense. We have a responsibility to our owners, our shareholders, and as well, first and foremost. And we want to be responsible, but we need to also look after ourselves. So do it in a good way. So long answer saying that there is no easy short answer.
Okay, thank you. Probably so true. Anna, I'd like to end with going back where we started with this erratic president of the White House. And even if the shipping industry hasn't been that affected yet, how would you say that Swedish enterprises in general have been affected, which may in the long run also cause some effects on the shipping actors?
I'm happy you asked that question because, I mean, obviously shipping is the bloodstream of global trade. But when we talk to our companies, and we have a median number of 7 employees of the member companies, 60,000 member companies at the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise. And what we hear from the small companies differ from this. The fact that we have tariffs that are 15, 20, 25, sometimes up to 50%, no smaller company can have that kind of margin for a longer time. And you might know or might not know that the car tariffs are still not down at 15. They're still at 27.5, and we don't see them getting lowered tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So I get very mixed messages. Other sectors are not doing so well. Small companies struggle much more. So that's why we need to work on these global issues with those global big companies, but we also need to fix our own European single market. And there we have to do both. We can't choose. Here Sweden must be a front runner. We have a good reputation in both those areas, single market within the EU and global trade. We should use our voice. We should be more of a, I don't know, disturb the meetings and talk out clearly when France and Germany are perhaps making things too complicated, because this is a moment of survival. We haven't talked about Ukraine, we haven't talked about the other challenges we have in the world, but it's no time for being slow. We need to act, and we know what we need to do, so let's do it now.
Let's do it now and disturb the meetings, but don't glue yourself to the ceiling. That's a bad connotation.
We still want to be invited to the cocktails, right?
Thank you so much for giving your insights and thoughts to us today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, shipping is indeed a global industry where the actors have many interests in common, but also differing preconditions and sometimes agendas. To understand and speak for them all is not always an easy task, and one who's quite familiar to that is our next guest, Secretary General of ICS, Thomas Kasakos. Where are you? Welcome. Please.
Morning again.
I just claimed that you have a difficult job. Do you agree?
You put it very mildly, to be honest with you.
Ah, put it mildly. Well, you're all amongst friends. What you say here stays in the room, okay?
Yeah.
Good. If you were to point out, let's say, the 3 burning issues from your perspective, which would they be?
Can I be rude enough, and following up from the previous panel, just
course.
to say, first of all, a big thank you for having me here. And I have to say I've been so positively impressed as to the feeling that I get from the Swedish members that we have. And as far as I can see, it's very nice to hear a regulator, a government spokesman, the minister. I've heard it both with and without the microphone, and you did very well. It's very encouraging for us representing the industry. Perhaps 2 seconds as to who we are, so the audience could really understand.
Absolutely.
The International Chamber of Shipping, Minister, I'm sure you know, and most of the colleagues here, is the international voice of 40 national shipowners associations representing more than 80% of the global fleet. Our uniqueness is that we represent national associations that they have to deal every day with ministers, politicians, and of course, parliaments. And this makes us more responsible in terms of conveying the messages, and that's going back to your original statement as to how difficult the ICS, not my job, the ICS is to bring together as much as consensus in order to have one voice, one set of arguments, one set of positions, if possible, wherever. And I have to congratulate the previous panel. I've been in the industry for many decades, but it's always so exciting for me to hear from the people who are on the front line, because we are dealing with regulators. We're not there to fight for them in that respect. So as far as ICS is concerned, our main raison d'etre is to make sure that we have a sustainable, competitive, international level playing field. And I've heard quite a bit from the previous panel. I'm very encouraged, at least by some of the statements from the speakers. But again, many thanks to the Swedish Shipowners Association, one of our founding and very long-standing supporting member. In fact, they do speak out at the meetings, I have to say. And now I have to say that they are highly represented by, on the top of our presidency office, by Klaus Berkel, who's one of our 4 vice chairmen. So I'm a good old friend and colleague for many years. So sorry for taking that. It's just to explain to people where we come from, and some of the positions that I will hopefully able to convey will relate to that. Sustainable, competitive, international playing level field. Because without that, all the issues that you have been discussing before, with all due respect, I think will not have the impact that you would like to have. Now, answering quickly your original question, well, for us, and perhaps if I may selfishly use the first term me, which I'm just a new kid, I just took over in 16th of June, but I've been in the industry for 33 years, is one is the erosion of international regulation when it comes to shipping. And most of the issues that we're going to talk about, first of all, it was the protectionism, the regional measures, decarbonization, one can even see it from that perspective, safety, security, all these things, they come down to one thing. If we are talking about a truly globalized industry like ours, maybe I'm biased because I've always been in this industry, but I don't know another one which is so globalized as the one we have. So anything short of international measures brings the elements that from the Confederation that was mentioned, that you have 2 types of companies and things like that. So for us, number 1 issue is the strengthening of the international regulation in order to achieve sustainable, competitive international level playing field.
But strengthening this sort of global bonds, how difficult is that when, as you said, on the same time you see a growing regionalism, which seems for me like working in the opposite direction?
Yes, we have this understanding amongst our members that yes, whilst Sweden, for example, and is doing well, and praise the minister for listening to the industry and trying to develop one part, let's say the tonnage tax system, which is a good system, and well done to the ministry for listening to the industry. For us, we identify the major issues. Right now, the 2 major issues is, of course, the green transition, decarbonization, which is an ongoing process, and the other one, of course, is what we call it the regionalism or the protectionism, and what we're trying to do to handle these 2 issues. So if you ask me for 2, these are the 2, I would say. But under the first pillar, which is we need to work together to handle these issues on a much more closer cooperation basis to reach the global level playing field, which we're seeing this deteriorating now.
And do you see steps going in that direction or being taken in that direction?
Well, I'd like to believe that common sense and the years of experience that we've seen before we've seen this explosion, if you like, of regional measures, they will bring back for the industry the memories that this is the right direction. Take, for example, the issue of tariffs or protectionism. One study that I've read before I came here indicates that if we lower the existing ones, we'll reduce at least to most of the economies 3.4% of their GDP. Whilst if we keep adding to them, the operational cost increases. I've heard that there are challenges and opportunities, which is fine, some niche areas, but the overall addition of restrictions to trade cannot be a positive thing. So for us, it's something that we have to focus, and this is what we're trying to do collectively. And one thing that makes the ICS different is that we don't just represent Europeans. And you've seen, and of course Scandinavians, but all parts of the world, we're trying to bring them together because there is differences between one part of the world with the other, but the problems are the same. The solutions to them most of the times are the same.
Speaking about global solutions and green transitions, it was mentioned in the panel before, the IMO agreement due to be decided in October, and it's no secret that the US has opposed it. If it gets through, do you think we can expect full acceptance?
Okay, that's a very good question and a very timely one, and I'm glad that the minister is here as well. Let me just remind those who, I'm sure they don't need to, that the industry under the ICS had worked for many years to come up with its own proposal, so we're not just moan and groan to the governments, we have a problem sorted out. We put our heads together from all parts of the world. We came out with a suggestion. We put it to the IMO. Unfortunately, it was not accepted. Still, the industry said we are committed, because I've seen many of you have already invested in this thing way before it's even a requirement by national and international legislation. So what we are saying is that we fully, if you like, publicly supported this, but it has some sort of connotations. Just pushing it through in October, for us, is just one part. It's just the beginning. And it's important that it's not just pushed by the minimum number of countries. It's important to get through by the highest possible, because then the political message that will go out to those countries that you referred to before in your panel discussion, it's clear that it's solidarity, that when it comes to the clarifying the buts that we'll say in just a second, and then subsequently, which is the implementation, and then even after that is the enforcement of the international standard, because having a regulation is fine. It can be pushed through on international organizations like IMO, but implementing on the same level, that's the story. So for us, it's necessary, and we will continue working on that to make sure that we also get a very clear commitment from the governments in October in two areas, if I may, Minister. One, of course, is to make sure that we don't have this double counting, double charging, because it doesn't give the right incentive, first for the owners themselves to invest, but also for the producers that we want them to de-risk this situation. And then, of course, we have to combine this with the reward system. These are clear things that they have to come out in October with a clear political commitment, because that's the only way we can all continue supporting them on a global basis. And I have to say, I know that there was a lot of discussion before about the European Union. Fine, we understand that the work that they have done in order to push the IMO to reach that level, it's credible, but at the same time, we have to appreciate that insisting on regional measures, no matter where they come, no matter if it's now about the decarbonization and before we're talking about tariffs. Let me give you a very recent example. Us and a few other organizations, as we reach out to the EU and we said, you have to make commitment to replace once the IMO system is up and running. We have also reached out to some other regional places, African states, that they come up with this. And I have to tell you, I have seen some reports in the press that came up to us and say, how dare you come and tell us, developing countries, that supposedly the fund that you create is going to help us, come tell us not to do it, whilst you don't put pressure on EU to do it. So you are either colonial or imperialist, and you're telling us not to do it, and you don't say anything to the EU. So the message I'm trying to pass on is that, yes, we are committed. We will still support this. It's very important. That will make our industry the first sector worldwide that will have a very clear capture price system in operation. So it's a credit to the ship owners who have invested in this, but you have also to come very clear with a commitment that these gray areas will have to be addressed. Otherwise, you will give the ammunition to those countries that they want to continue trying to dynamite the situation. One last point, if I may. We have to look at this system not like as a money-making machinery for governments, because if the assessments that some of the experts are doing, we are talking about a huge fund, from 25 billion to 100 billion within a few years. This is one of the biggest banks I will know, and this should be governed by a government system. So we have to make sure that this commitment that we are asked to do will bring the required political result, which is none other than shipping become truly green and decarbonized. Because otherwise, if they don't answer these questions, and some of the speakers before they touch upon this, it will still be financially more make sense to continue paying the price and don't decarbonize. So at the end of the day, what we'll end up doing, we'll create a system where it's going to be huge tax for the ship owners and an escape clause not to reach decarbonization.
There are so many crucial steps here, so many things that have to fall in place to make this work in the long run.
Yes.
Are you optimistic that it will work?
Well, I'm a natural and paid optimist,
Luckily.
I'm paid to say these things.
Are
But
you paid to say that? Okay.
no. But joking aside, let's look at the alternative scenario. What will happen in October if, after so many ways of working, and this is a very good question to be listened to the government representatives. Us as shipping, and I fully agree with the previous speakers, we will improvise, adapt, overcome. We have always done, we will always will. As long as the shipping remains the main transport, and we are the chain. You're absolutely right. We're not part of it. We are the main chain, supply facilitator. Imagine what will be the political message to this UN agency that it has as its flag issue now, and if after all these years, and especially after April, they've decided, no, we cannot go through. That will bring into full question mark of the viability and the sustainability of that organization. And if that is the case, then we're going into completely uncharted territories, because then we're going to see a lot more regionalism and protectionism. It's not just on decarbonization. It will be on security, it will be on safety, it will be on wages. We are living it now. But as you said before, we are paying a bit too much attention on the US kind of thing. But the other problems, we are facing them every day. Here, for example, the latest Norway wages issue is not new. We have the UK, we have the France, now it's Norway. It's a sign that if we don't move to the right direction, which is none other, sustainable, competitive, international level playing field. You can still have your national issues look after like your government has done, which is very good, but it doesn't affect the global trade. It adds to the competitiveness of the national country, in this case, Sweden.
Thomas Kasakos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's time for lunch, but I just want to mention, because some of you have been maybe saying, why don't you give them a present after speaking? This year's gift to the speakers is a donation to Mercy Ships. Good idea, huh? Wasn't mine, but still very good. As I said, the next panel will be about green transition. We'll go into depth. But now it's time to get something to eat, and we'll start again 20 minutes past 1, sharp. See you then, enjoy lunch. The shipping industry plays a crucial role in lowering global emissions. And there is a huge determination and an engagement within large, not to say most parts of the industry. Still, the transition doesn't come without some worries. Are there enough alternatives to fossil fuel? Is the infrastructure in place? And maybe the most burning question, is there enough willingness to pay the price among transport buyers? And is there also a need for regulatory changes to ensure a future sustainable shipping? And are necessary agreements going to be accepted? Our eminent panel here to discuss these topics consists of Anna Müller, CEO Volvo Penta, today representing Volvo Group. And now the spontaneous applause. Yes, Anna. Magnus Heimburg, CEO Preem. Ted Lundström, Head of Global Logistics Ovako and Chair of Swedish Shippers Council. And Karin Orsel, CEO MF Shipping and Chair of ECSA. Great to see you all here. And Anna, you are representing the whole Volvo Group, one could say today. Explain to us, how important is sustainable transport for Volvo?
No, but that's critical for us. First of all, I would actually like also to welcome not everyone only here to Donsö, but also to Gothenburg, the home of Volvo. So, heartily welcome. No, but sustainable transport is extremely important for us. First of all, we are ourselves closely linked to the transportation industry. I mean, we are one of the world's largest producers of trucks, buses, construction equipment, and propulsion systems. So for sure, from that perspective, it's important. Then you can say we are one of Sweden's largest transport buyers. We have committed to the Paris Agreement, so for sure, it is very important for us to transform our own transports to sustainable.
And when counting on the price, what's your strategy?
Today, and we talked about it in the former panel here, where we talked about the willingness to pay. And I think it is not about one part paying here. I think it is about the whole supply chain coming together also with our authorities and regulatory parties. For us, we have decided, we have 50,000 tier 1 suppliers, 50,000 tier 1 suppliers. Then you can imagine tier 2, tier 3. So now when we start to put our requirements on our tier 1 network, of course, that has enormous ripple effects. What we have decided now when we do our logistics sourcing is that we have decided to put a price on CO2. So that means that if you can come up with a more CO2 efficient solution, that will be taken into account in our sourcing. So of course we see our role in this, but we also see our suppliers' role, because our scope 3 emissions, that's our suppliers' scope 1. So I mean, we need to come together to jointly invest in alternative fuels and sustainable solutions. So for sure, we are also requiring that from our supply network.
Ted, you're representing in this context a smaller transport buyer, but what are your strategies around CO2 neutral or more efficient transports?
We have a pathway, and we are trying to figure out how to reach and be in line with this pathway, which is to 2040 or 2050. And we are addressing this slightly different. We are more putting in CO2 as part of the decision making. And we are also trying to figure out where do we get the most bang for the buck? Meaning, where do we have the low-hanging fruits? Where can we easily make this transition? Where is it harder? Where to start? And we are trying to address this broadly, meaning that we can actually lower our emissions right here, right now, without switching fuel, without switching the type of trucks or vessels, just by doing other things. And we think that we need to do all of these things in order to reach the target. And the technology will come, but we need to do other things to prepare, to adapt to this technology. So that is basically our approach. Okay,
you caught our curiosity. You're going to elaborate a bit on that later on. I just want to hear from you also, Karin. The willingness to pay, we heard the panel before saying it's not so much about that, or it's tough. Anna is describing another side from the Volvo industry. What is your opinion, or what do you see?
Just to come back to the name, because I know you had some challenges with that. So I'm representing the European Ship Owners Association, EXA, and that's why we changed the name, because it's a little bit difficult to spell. Our role is a little bit similar to like Thomas, which I think you heard of. But first of all, I think I need to give a big round of applause to the previous panel, because I was really impressed by the previous speakers. And more or less I said, okay, what can I add to this discussion now? Because I think the majority of the points have been made. And as European Ship Owners Association, our role and my role as a chair, because I'm just like you, a ship manager or a ship owner. So when I was asked to do this, they said it's not too much of time consuming. And you end up in great panels like these. And our role at EXA is to talk to the politicians. And I was very happy with the previous speaker when she said, times have changed. They listen to us. What we constantly say is, with the whole EU ETS and EU fuel, if in October we don't have a global answer, we will keep having a big challenge because it might be double taxation, which we don't need as ship owners. And until now, I think it's a combination of what you said, because the price is 5 times as high, and Annika said it rightly, we need to scale up. We talk constantly about having access to finance, because I think having access to European finance is still a challenge, especially for SMEs, but also to some of the bigger companies I recently heard. And if it's like the chicken and egg, so if there's no demand, which I'm very curious about, of course, I'm building the bridge to you. If there's no demand or no scaling up, the price difference will be there and the infrastructure needs to be there. So I think we look at governments, we try to talk to governments as much as possible. To give you an example, in the Netherlands, we actually did a survey amongst our ship owner members and said, hey, if you're buying new vessels, what will be your fuel of the future? Because the government is asking us on what infrastructure.
And what did they answer?
God, now you're doing the nasty one, of course. We see a lot of ship owners still buying conventional or prepare for, or having dual fuel. LNG, of course, is a solution for the next 20, 30 years. I think the majority of us agree upon that. And then there's a discussion about methanol or ammonia.
And their decision, is it based on that they're in certain of the supply, that it's enough, or it's about the investments, or how should one understand it?
It's a combination, because if you are not in a liner service and trade with your vessels in different ports, which might not have the opportunity to supply your vessels with the fuel you need. So that's why I said it's a combi, but those investments are so huge, you need to do it in good cooperation, and it will take maybe 5 to 10 years before we have the next infrastructure ready.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the supply side of this angle. What do you say, Magnus? Is there enough alternatives today ready?
I also would like to start with thank you very much for inviting me and my colleagues at Preem to this fantastic event. We're honored to be here and discuss and share our thoughts with you. And we definitely also believe that we are a partner in the system around transportation fuels, especially related to the marine sector. Yes, I would say that the supply side gradually starts to come into the marketplace. I know that there is a lot of discussions today, what type of renewable fuels will we use in the future? Of course, electricity is in the arena. Electrofuel is another type of fuel that potentially can be used in this industry going forward. But I would say that if we look to our product portfolio, we actually are able to provide already today fuels into the marine sector based on biofuels. Then, of course, it's a question of how much biofuels should we include in the total fuel portfolio. But the supply side is definitely there if you look into specifically biofuels.
Karin.
And just to add, because I think here we come back to the regulatory framework. There is no agreement on what is exactly considered biofuels between Europe and international. So this is one of actually the previous chair from EXA is buying a couple of vessels, and he's running into that problem, that in the regulatory framework, what exactly is biofuel is not correctly stipulated. So you buy top-notch, or actually 6 vessels, top-notch, and then in the rules and regulations, that small part is lacking. Meaning that he thought he invested in a super new vessel with biofuels, and now the discussion is what part is considered biofuel. So that is adding a little bit to that. And I'm not saying that you don't do that in a proper, but it's just a general comment which I think where the ship owners are looking at it saying, okay, I want to move forward. There's a clear commitment, I think, by many people here in the audience, but it's also a commitment from all of us here at the table. But we need the government to also look at those details, which makes a huge difference for all of us.
And I think you are touching upon a really interesting subject to discuss, because we all believe that transforming our respective businesses is not an easy thing to do. It will take a lot of time and many, many years. But when we discuss it, at least internally, and talk about how will we be able to transform, how will we be able to be this enabler for our customers, there are a couple of cornerstones that needs to be in place for us in order for us to do that. One, obviously, you are touching upon it, regulatory incentives. Politicians, they need to agree upon a ruling-based sector. And I think at least within the European Union today, we have that. We have EU maritime regulations, and we have aviation and so forth. The important stuff is that those type of regulations will actually stay there for a long time and not being changed from every now and then. Funding needs to be in place, and I think the Swedish government have been quite successful in order to provide different type of support when it comes to funding these type of transformations and big investments as it is in our industry. And finally, of course, you need to have technical solutions. And I think from our perspective, at least, the technical solutions are basically there. Then, of course, there are some fine-tunings that needs to be done when it comes to e-fuels and stuff like that. But from a technical perspective, I think we have come quite far.
We'll get back to regulations in a while, but you started with saying, Ted, there are a number of things we can do, and your strategy is based on some of them, which hasn't specifically to do with regulations. Could you give us some examples? What is doable today? What kind of possibilities do you see?
I think what was touched on in the previous panel is it's about the commercial terms. This is the key. And here we need help from the regulators, because we are talking about willingness to pay, which is an economic thing. I'm talking about ability to pay. We are talking about supply chain is shipping. I'm saying shipping is granting access to markets. If you cannot access markets, we cannot sell. And the thing is, if we are going into this major transition in the shipping industry, being sustainable, we need to address everything. We cannot address just fuel, we cannot address just engines, we cannot address just how we build the vessels. We need to address everything, because we need to get resources that is perhaps given away from regulations, free them, put them in to buy fuel instead, because fuel might be more expensive. Because if we do the math, there is not sufficient green fuel in the world to make shipping green. And then, me coming from the steel industry, when we put in our wish list, and the next industry, and the next industry, and the next industry,
there won't be any green electricity left for the shipping industry.
We also need to be more energy efficient. We need to be more efficient in route optimizing. We need to lower our energy consumption per ton kilometer, cost per ton kilometer. That's the thing.
Anna?
No, but I think for us, this is of course key. I mean, we talk about, there are steps here. We also say that there is not one technology that is going to solve this. I think we also talk about fuel efficiency, of course, burn less, but also then burn clean and burn green. And I think this is a stepwise approach that we apply. And you are absolutely right. And I think many of you have seen when we present what we call the equation, which is exactly what you are into. You require everything. The products and services needs to be there. The TCO needs to be there, including CO2 taxes or premiums, regulations, etc., so that you can actually calculate on the alternative. You also need the accessibility of infrastructure, green fuel, and the whole supply chain. And this cannot be, we cannot point only at the authorities. I think we need to look at private and corporations here also to achieve this transformation, because it will not be only the policymakers coming up here. We need to jointly, in the whole supply chain, come together to make this happen. And as AB Volvo, we are investing heavily now in electromobility charging infrastructure together with our competitors, Daimler and Traton. We have a joint venture. But of course, we are planning to invest in 1,700 fast chargers for heavy-duty transport, but Europe will need 40,000 to electrify transportation fully. So it will not happen in one time. It will happen segment by segment and region by region. But I mean, by pushing and continuing investing in this, I think this is the way forward. Because as a big transport buyer, we also recognize that we have a huge, huge responsibility in making the whole value chain green. And we have a responsibility of providing some of the machinery required to achieve this. And then I mainly talk on land.
Magnus and
yeah,
then
just one final comment on the supply side. I think there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the supply side. I think one have to bear in mind that if we're combining biofuels with electricity, but also e-fuels, you will get quite far. So not only focusing on only one type of fuel will be one of the recipes. I understand. But the thing is, I can understand that also from a ship owner's perspective, that could be a little bit complicated.
Do you agree, Karin? A bit complicated?
No, it is, and especially in the tanker market, where there's a lot of requirements on the crew who's operating the vessels. And I think we all know who are in the tanker market that if you have a tanker with an ECDIS, which is a navigation equipment, that it needs to be type specific, and your crew on board needs to have a type specific course to be allowed by the oil majors to run on that vessel. So now think a little bit bigger. We have 3 or 5 different options. And do we need the crew to be trained for all of them? That is something I think Annika addressed a little bit of the crew, but this is something which on a higher level in an organization called Just in Transition, where we actually realized all together we have a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is not only techniques and finance, it's the people on board of the vessels, and how can we make sure we don't overburden them, because you want to be able to exchange your crews between different vessels at times, rotate them. But this is one of those subjects which is really challenging, which we address on a really high level with both schools, ICS, Thomas's organization, IMO, and the classification societies, because we need to train, what is it, 850,000 seafarers, I think, before 2030. Oh. That is impossible. So we need to think of creative solutions, and that is one thing I really love about this industry, how big the problem is. 5 minutes or 1 minute to 12, we for sure have a solution for.
So you're going to fix this?
I'm not myself. I can try it, but we need to do it together. Yeah. And that's key. What you hear here constantly is cooperation. Indeed, finance is not for me for one fuel, but it's about working together. And I think you all recognize that getting funding from an EU institute is challenging. So we need to narrow things down, make it more accessible for the bigger group, and then the demand is there, and then we can take next steps which we all want to take.
Ted, what do you think about this competence challenge that Karin was mentioning? Or maybe you wanted to react to something else?
No, that's for sure. It's complicated. And we see that lack of competence in a lot of different areas. And there's another type of competence needed. I mean, we can see and we hear from trucking industry that, okay, suddenly you need another type of competence at the maintenance shops or at maintenance. And that's another type of people than you usually hire, perhaps. So, and the same goes for us as an industry. I think, I said it before and I say it again, I think if we find it complex today, we have not even understood how complex it needs to be in the future to solve this. We need other, I mean, when we calculate on emissions today, we calculate on diesel. Simple. Oh yeah, we have a B7 Swedish diesel and we have a B7 EU diesel and oh, it became a little bit complex. This is not even near how complex it needs to be in the future. And then it needs to be into the reliability of the system and so on. And this kind of tends to be a little bit terrifying because complex, we want to make it easy. And what makes complex is yeah, you tend to just go and lay down over there and give up.
Or keep doing what you used to do.
Yeah, exactly. But I saw a program on TV in a book talking about ecosystems. And they said the most robust ecosystems are the most complex ones.
Are the most, sorry?
Complex.
The complex one, yes.
They create redundancy for themselves. So.
And are we up to this very complex future that
but it's complex. 35% of the Volvo Group's CO2 emission from transport comes from shipping. Today, 15%, we have been able to reduce that with the help of biodiesel. So I think we should also not be too gloomy here. I mean, there are steps taken. We are making steps forward here jointly together. I think there are a lot of investments in, you know, everyone that is operating also vessels and our partners. You are investing in more efficient ships, in more efficient transport. We are looking, of course, at regional value chains because that's another way of reducing the need to transport. And I think, unfortunately, right now, that is also pushed by other reasons, that we need to look more regionally on our value chains. But for sure, the fuel efficiency, you know, changing step by step now into various alternative fuels, I think it is proving, we can see that this is also possible. Then is it going fast enough? Maybe, you know, we would like to see it go faster. And to your point, I happen to have sold quite a few trucks and also electric trucks. I've been heading up the truck business in Europe. And, you know, in this transformation, I must say the workshops, don't worry about them. That's the easy part of transforming. I mean, our technicians that's a training program, but we know how to do it, you know how to do it. So I think that's not the biggest challenge. I think for us it has been other matters like availability of charging and electricity, etc. That is the big challenge, and the discrepancy, of course, between fuel prices.
Karin.
No, I always and I don't take one. I'm very tempted to take over your role. So, but I'm just looking here in the audience, and I'm quite sure that every ship owner and ship manager who's in the audience here has done so much already on energy efficiency. And I'm just looking at a few people. So Joachim, how much do you save with your new vessels? 40%. So I'm not afraid indeed of what you said, that we're not going to make the target, but it's more the new energies and how can we all make sure that we get access to it in a safe way, and taking into account all the challenges, I like challenges, all the challenges we face as an industry. And I think what is really good, and also during these days, is that you see a proactive ministry. You see proactive people in the government. It has been a hard wake-up call for Europe. And to give you an example, so in Sweden, how do you call it, electricity at the port is handled by the government, I think. In the Netherlands, where you think, oh, small port, that's not the case. So there is the burden on the ship owner. And how many miles are we apart from each other? So it's a very good example of we want to be one Europe, but we have different regulation, and how good would have, it's easy to look back, but how good would have been if we all have more or less the same strategy from our government, because then it helps the ship owners as well. So it's...
In the last panel, or the former panel, we talked a bit about the cost of the transition while still staying competitive. And I mean, for Volvo, that's reality of Waco as a steel company. It goes for all of you. And what are your thoughts upon what it does to the tempo and determination maybe of the transition when there's quite a challenging economic situation in the world and very wobbling, to say the least? What would you say, Magnus?
No, but I agree. I mean, the geopolitical situation that we are experiencing and has been experienced for a couple of years now is, of course, putting some extra demands on the transition. We have noticed that among some of our customers that they need to focus on other stuff. They need to look after their costs and so forth. But it's also encouraging, I believe, to many of our customers. They believe that the transition must go on. The pace of the transition probably will slow down a little bit, but the long-term view is there still. And I think that's what we need to keep on to in general. It will not be a straight line from fossil to fossil-free. It will come with quite a number of bumps. Will it take 15 years? Will it take 20 years? That's impossible to say because you always have this type of external factors that could impact your ability to transform.
And for Preem specifically, how has it affected your strategies and your own tempo?
I mean, we still have our strategy to transform, but what has come much higher on our agenda is the resilience part, the resilience discussion with authorities, with also customers around security of supply. So that item has increased dramatically. Yeah.
And Anna, how is it? How do you discuss around these topics?
No, but of course it is impacting the pace. I mean, we see that very clearly, and I think most of you who read our report in Q2 also saw that we took a pretty big write-down related to our EMAB strategy because of the slower adoption. With that said, we are still investing, and we are still investing in various alternatives, as I said here, because it will be coming in different paces in different parts of the world. So, I mean, for sure, it is impacting us, but we are still very, very committed on where we are going. For us, it is important, and we have a lot of course, requests on the regulatory authorities, and not least EU, regarding the build-out of infrastructure. And as AB Volvo, we are also very positive to a technology-neutral CO2 taxation. We believe that is important in order to make this shift to happen, but with the importance not to regulate technology, but the CO2 emissions. And for us, that is one of the things that we are looking for, and we see good examples where we see countries having gone that route. So obviously that is working. If you look at land transportation, we can see that clearly. Then, for sure, when it comes to shipping and shipping that is going, across Atlantic or to Asia, of course, you need the IMO regulations, which we are supporting, even though we are not in the authority ourselves. Yeah.
And European ship owners, have their determination or tempo slowed down due to the economic turmoil?
Yeah, this is the interesting part. So one head is of course EXA, and at EXA I have to say that we want to be, we need to invest. This is an opportunity, that's more or less what we say. The green and investing and creating the cooperation and making sure that we create biofuels in Europe could actually be a really interesting business case, which I think a couple of people and examples we'll be giving this morning is the opportunity, or is the case. Now, privately, I think it's the challenge is also, as Europe with previously the Green Deal, is that I think within Europe, the European Commissioner realized that maybe we have been too much on the forefront, so we need to take some steps back, because otherwise we will actually lose our competitiveness. And I recognize that, and I agree with that, because, and this is one of those letters which I'm horrible at, say, DSR, what is it, say, help me, exactly, again?
SRD.
Exactly. So the regulations and reporting is tremendously. So if you look at many of our companies, we had to hire additional 2, 3, maybe even more people to fulfill all the rules and regulations and all the reporting. And now the commissioner came back and say, okay, we recognize that, it's too much, let's lower the standard, which is great. At the same time, the industry is already aware of receiving this data, so I don't see everybody stepping back and say, oh, it was nice that I got that from you in the past, now I don't need it anymore. So it's a little bit of mixed feeling, but my sense is that Europe will withdraw some of the rules and regulations, absolutely not saying that we should not continue. I echo what has been said here, because we as an industry take our responsibility. I'm fully standing behind that quote, but we need to be reasonable.
But does it mean that the regulations, if I understand it correctly, or the burden with the regulation and bureaucracy has to diminish, but the tempo in the transition has to be kept on? I guess you all agree with lowering the bureaucracy burden.
No, but the regulatory burden, yes, of course. Looking at the technology transformation, I think I think Robert was into it in the previous session. I mean, we are looking very much at Europe, but in the meantime, I mean, there are, for instance, China now moving with, very high speed into, for instance, electrification. We discussed it also previously, also e-fuels. So, I mean, it's also a matter of Europe and the rest of the world keeping up with the pace here, or we will see something very ugly happening, I believe. So, I mean, for us as AB Volvo, it's also keeping up with the technology development, being in the forefront, because today, if you look at material handling in Chinese ports, they are more or less all electrified. So, when it comes to material handling machinery, which we are, from Volvo Penta, for instance, involved in propelling.
So is the risk we're being surpassed, for example, by China?
No, but of course, if you have that size of market and you are electrifying, you get economies of scale. And I mean, it is important that we are able to keep up the volumes in order also to get our cost levels to the right level. So I mean, it is also about competitiveness of Europe and European manufacturers.
Do you agree, Magnus?
No, I can only subscribe to what you're talking about, especially related to China. My experience when it comes to fuel production, once they decide to go into a certain segment, regardless of it's biofuels or e-fuels or whatever, they do it. And they do it as a country, not as a corporate. And of course, those type of conditions are difficult to compete on. If you are a European producer of fuel and you have a certain country that basically decides to do all the investments without any return demand on return and so forth, because they think that's the right direction. So that's an aspect that is complicating the competitive landscape. I fully agree upon that.
Do you also fear that we might be surpassed by China in this green transition? They have the whole state machinery behind them and can work on different terms?
For sure, in some industries. I will not directly comment on the general, but what we can learn from them is that they are consistent and keep to their strategy over time. And it seems to be successful for at least some things that they are doing. What they failed in, I don't know. That might also be a number of cases. And that is kind of what we are lacking perhaps in the European politics is the consistency over time and the strategy over time. You can get the reduction quota, it's one example of that. We need to know, because we do investments for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
You need to know that you get that back. And a little, just to reflect also on the aspect of, is it tougher now to do the transition? Our company is fully committed to do this. We reduced our CO2 emissions with 58% since 2015. We are keeping up the pace. We are in the front of doing this. This is a long-term commitment. We are keeping to this. But of course, if we see that our customers, for instance, doesn't see a competitive advantage of having low CO2 emissions, and they are struggling to survive financially, of course, as CEO, I doubt any CEO would prioritize sustainability before keeping their company alive. So, of course, but this goes up and down, and we need to live with that and keep to...
And what do you think is a situation... sorry, Magnus.
No, just one comment related to that. I think two very main drivers of getting the CEOs to change is the regulations. Politicians can actually agree upon the regulation and stick to them. And the other one is capital markets. Investors probably, at least in the long run, will not invest in those type of businesses that has a high content of fossil fuel.
And would you value any one of them as higher or more important? Does anyone come first? The regulators or the customers?
I mean,
could customers
at the
drive
end of the day, and if you want to have a sustainable business, you need to have an underlying and strong demand, and that will only come from your customers. I think what the regulators can do and the politicians can do is to bridge a period of time when potentially there are a little bit uncertainties of what type of supply is there, and what type of fuels will be valuable to invest in long term. But bridging, yes, but in the long run, the underlying demand, of course, must come from the customers.
Speaking about regulations, you mentioned it, and we talked a little bit about it before. The IMO awaited decision in October. What do you say, Karin? Are you confident that it will pass, the agreement on CO2 emissions?
As European ship owners, we say there's only one way forward, and that is that it's being adopted. But I think in the geopolitical scene, and I think Thomas said it rightfully and you addressed it as well, there's a lot of pressure from various countries. And our biggest challenge is indeed regional regulations. When we started the discussions many years ago within Europe, it was very clear that Europe thought IMO is not going forward quick enough. So we want to set our own set of standard rules. At the same time, they also said various times, if IMO is ready, we will look and assess our regulations, which I think all of us interpretate, is that the word? As Europe will then pull back. In reality, will EU ETS fully disappear? I think many in this audience have the same dream, but I think we're all realistic that it might not be 100% the case. We, of course, pushing for it, no doubt, and all of us in various organizations. But it's about what I think within Europe we're talking about 10 billion a year, which the governments will earn and promise to put back majority into the maritime industry. In the energy transition, but it doesn't go back 100% to our industry, which I think everybody more or less hopes for, but it's not realistic, because I think if a part goes to a port and the facilities at the port are better, that's also maritime industry. And I think we as ship owners sometimes say, no, it needs to go back to us because we pay for it. I think what is key and very important is that we are on speaking terms with all our partners. There is a realization, but politics is politics. So it's depending on what the next months is actually happening. I've seen the Secretary General going, not Thomas, but the Secretary General of IMO, he's flying around the globe like crazy in the summer months ahead of the big discussion in October. He's convinced, and you hear two sounds. So it's for us in Europe, it's key because it's our same governments who also vote at the IMO.
But as you said, where the money goes, if it goes back to ship owners or not, I can understand it's a vital question. But on the other hand, if, as you said, if ports in distant seas doesn't have their infrastructure or can't support the green ships sailing away from Europe, I mean, what have you gained then?
No, but again, this is the interesting. So sometimes I speak personally, and other times as EXA. Personally, I think it's okay if everything goes back also to the greening of the ports, because then it's in our benefit as well. But you also have ship owners who say, no, come on, I'm paying for it, so it should go back directly in something I benefit of. For me, a port is a beneficial thing. But so there's, and it's logic, because everybody, of course, fights for its own business, so it makes sense. But key is that we avoid double taxation, double payment, or double counting is the word we're supposed to use, and harmonization of legislation is the buzzword.
Finally, I'd like to ask you, a bit connected to the IMO, which the US opposes. What difference does it make that we have a total new administration, and I don't know how to describe it, not that interested in green transition anymore? What difference does it make for you and your businesses? Or is the globe big enough without the states? What would you say, Anna?
It's a very broad question because, of course, it impacts AB Volvo in many ways because, of course, we have big operations in the US. So for sure, it's impacting us in various ways. When it comes to our transport buying and how we try to transform that, maybe more into you, of course, maybe not so much.
And for you, Magnus?
I mean, we are a Scandinavian producer, and we mainly place our products within the European Union. So from a product/demand point of view, not so much, but if you look upon the raw materials, which is much more of a global place, so to speak, then we can see differences, and especially in the patterns that raw materials travel. And that indirectly then impacts prices also. So more on the raw material side, not so much on the demand side.
And for you, Ted?
A general answer to that. I think that, of course, it affects because free trade is in general a good thing. This helps innovation, this helps us to solve global problems. So I think everything that is against global trade is by definition bad. And I don't think also tier one, perhaps not that much, but we live in supply networks where everything intercepts in things that no one really understands. We saw that during the pandemic. This is so complex, so you cannot foresee how things affect.
Given this complex world, I must say you really have a good temper and spread some optimism. I think that's specific, maybe not only for the shipping industry, but would you say all in all, Karin, that you're hopeful for the future?
Oh, absolutely. I always hate it when people say, how long are you in the industry? But I think we are way too modest in a way. We should be way prouder and be more vocal about what we're doing. I think we are one of the most regulated industries and still doing fine. Yes, we have this reputational discussion often. The example was given of was it the Ever Given in... And how stupid this might sound, but I was actually happy that it happened, not for the owner of the vessel, etc., or the crew, but it made the general public realize how much they are depending on us. So that's a stupid mind twist. But coming back to your question on the US, so in the beginning they say, oh, US is only 3% has only 3% in the maritime industry. But it's about the broader picture. And there the influence is quite big. And what I found quite shocking is that people who have been representing the US at IMO for eons now all are being on an early retirement, to put it polite. And that is, again, a very clear signal. So we have to deal with it. But the world is changing. But I am a strong believer that there is a solution for anything. And we need to adjust. And I think we're very good at that. So I'm very positive. And I hope to be working in this industry for many more years. Because it's a unique business, I would say. And before COVID, I would say it's like a virus, but that's not a good word anymore. So it's more like once you're in this industry, it's in your vein, in your blood and in your veins. And I think we're all very passionate. And that is also one of those things what I really like. It doesn't matter to who you talk. We have the same passion for this industry and everybody's working in it.
There's a solution for everything. Remember that. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Maybe we should remember that when entering our last session and also changing subject. There are numerous of security challenges in our surrounding world today. I don't have to repeat that too many times. But Russia's offensive war on Ukraine, of course, the war in Gaza followed by Houthi attacks on shipping. In addition to that, new cyber threats and hybrid attacks, supply chain disruptions. So what is needed to secure global trade as well as civil preparedness in times of conflict and crisis? Before discussing that with the last panel, I would like to welcome the political advisor to the Maritime Allied Command, Professor James Bergeron. He's here to set the scene for us. Give him a warm welcome.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Regards from my boss, Vice Admiral Mike Utley, Commander, Allied Maritime Command, who sadly can't be here. He's getting ready to be down in Portugal for the REPMUS Autonomous Experimentation annual event. Right. I should say, of course, that my own remarks are mine only, so don't attribute them completely to NATO. And also then to thank Anders in particular and all the organizing committee for inviting me and your great hospitality. For those who aren't familiar with who we are, MARCOM, Allied Maritime Command, which sits in Northwood near London, is the maritime theater headquarters for NATO in Allied Command operations. The organizational chart for the old-timers in the room is very flat compared to what you would have known in the past. Everyone essentially works for Supreme Allied Commander Europe, but of course, in a real crisis or contingency, reporting relationships would be created. But this gives SACEUR great flexibility in terms of what we do. There are 3 joint commands and then the theater components. MARCOM has a number of specific roles. I'll just put them all up. Right. We're the theater maritime commander, which means that we command all the submarines and all the maritime patrol aircraft everywhere. They don't go under any joint force command control. We keep them. We're also the principal maritime advisor to SACEUR. What that essentially means is that MARCOM has the authoritative voice for the maritime domain on, let's say, in a multi-front crisis. Where are we well suited with maritime power? Where do we need more? And can we trade more from one to another? MARCOM has that voice for the maritime, just as the Joint Force Commander has that voice for the region. Command of Maritime Forces. I can't get into the details here, but essentially, MARCOM is the maritime commander for everything that will be under the NATO flag. We have a number of 2-star commands beneath us. The new Commander Task Force model, CTF Baltic, is currently activated for the Enhanced Vigilance Activity, Baltic Sentry. That is a major change in our structure. Throughout the noughties and the teens, The NATO responsive capability, the NRF, response force, was designed to deal with one non-Article 5 remote crisis in one place at one time with a modest force. Now we have the C2 architecture to fight a hemispheric conflict, if we had to. And it's a hemispheric problem. As you know, the seas are connected. There are no borders, although there are political borders like the area of responsibility of NATO for Supreme Allied Commander Europe. But we have problems from middle-sized and great powers, from terrorism, from drugs, from immigration, all kinds of issues that constantly put the sea and the security of the seas into question. And I would suggest that shipping is in the crosshairs of this. It's been coming on for a few decades now, but it has really, really reached its head since about the last 5 or 6 years. Everything from the attack on shipping, as Russia did in the beginning of the Ukraine war, to the utilization of ships as forms of hybrid aggression, as potentially in the anchor dragging incidents in the Baltic, to potential blockade of Taiwan by China, which is aimed, of course, at shipping. In all of these areas, and of course the Houthis with their rather despicable attacks on shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Shipping has become a significant part of this moment we're living through, which in so many ways is the weaponization of trade. You could paraphrase Trotsky here and say, although the shipping community is not interested in war, war is certainly interested in the shipping community. Now, what kind of situation are we in? Well, this is a picture we often use, and that's an actual slide from our daily brief. It took place sometime last autumn. I can keep the date unknown, therefore it's unclassified. But the blue dots are all the Allied ships at sea, and the red dots are all the Russian ships at sea on a typical day. In the Cold War, we tended to outnumber them 1.5 to 1, maybe 2, sometimes less. Sometimes they outnumbered us. Now we outnumber them. Now we tend to outnumber them 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 8 to 1 in terms of conventional surface power, and in submarines, better than that. Sometimes far better than that. So, is everything okay then? No. First, we don't live in Nelson's Navy days. We're not going to defeat the Russian Navy ship by ship. We're trying to defeat the Russian strategy. And for that, maritime plays a critical role in two important ways. One, we need to convince the Kremlin that we can horizontally escalate. They would want to keep any conflict in a pocket, localized. We will signal that won't be allowed. Second, that they will want to keep it short. 3 weeks and then a negotiated solution that largely favors them. We will signal that we can keep the war going as long as it takes, and we will prevail. That's another place where shipping really comes in. The importance of sea lines of communication, particularly transatlantic sea lines of communication. The cynic would say, why? Most likely the war will be over in 3 or 4 weeks. The shipping won't really start flowing for 2 or 3 months. But that's not the point. The viability of that slot signals that we are prepared for the long haul, something the Kremlin does not like, and which will, we believe, keep them from keeping their finger off the trigger. There's another problem with this slide, however, which is it looks a little 20th century. Sea power equals the number of gray hulls and tonnage at sea. Largely true, but not entirely true anymore, and for 2 different reasons. One, hello? One is that very advantage in conventional capability and the continuing nuclear equilibrium between the great powers creates the hybrid space. It creates the gray zone of activity. That doesn't exist without it. It is precisely because we have a threshold beyond which neither side wants to go for fear of uncontrollable escalation that contestation is driven into the unattributable or implausibly attributable. And therefore we have what we call, it's not a Russian term, it's ours, but it's what we call hybrid activity. And we're seeing a number of examples of it. Most recently, perhaps most famously in this part of the world, are the series of anchor dragging incidents, the 4 major ones in the Baltic Sea, which led to the creation of Enhanced Vigilance Activity Baltic Sentry, which I'll come to in a moment, and the potential weaponization of commercial shipping, and particularly one subset of commercial shipping, which what's often, we think, erroneously called the Russian shadow fleet. Our own view on this, the term I've coined, to paraphrase Talleyrand on the Holy Roman Empire, neither Russian nor shadow nor fleet. But it is a phenomenon, and that phenomenon is growing by, as you all know far better than me, is growing by leaps and bounds with potentially, globally, 300, 350 ships flying completely fraudulent flags. The freedom of navigation system, ultimately, I believe, cannot survive that. So one of the great questions in the months and years ahead is what we do about that level of illegality at sea. UNCLOS 110 is out there. This is an unusual moment. Normally, navies and alliances hem and haw over their lack of legal power. This is not the case now. We have all the legal power we need. It's a question of political will. Baltic Century itself. I was in Helsinki for the Baltic meetings of the heads of state and government with the Secretary General and ComMarcom. And it was an impressive event as we launched EAGLE-S, not EAGLE-S, I'm sorry, in response to EAGLE-S, we launched Enhanced Vigilance Activity, Baltic Century. We now have a great number of ships, mostly regional, under the command and or coordination of the stood-up Commander Task Force Baltic in Rostock, working for MARCOM, that is keeping monitoring, observing, hailing and warning, tracking, and keeping a very close eye on potential ships that might potentially endanger undersea infrastructure. It's been a significant run-out for us. The other major change is it sparked something we were slow on a bit, which was the adaptation of modern technology, particularly autonomy. So we launched something called Task Force X in a matter of a few weeks rather than a few years. We have had 6 months to experiment with it. During the NATO summit, we had about 100 plus drones at sea under our control, and now we're starting to move away from experimentation into implementation. That will be a game changer for the situational awareness that we need at sea. But there are others playing with autonomy, and they're ahead of us. The first revolution in military affairs, run out during the second Gulf War, the Iraq Kuwait War, Desert Storm, was about exquisite technology procured at incredibly high cost by very senior scientists, owned by only a few countries that could afford it and had the technology to run it. And that dominated our thinking on striking power for 25 years. The second revolution in military technology, or revolution in military affairs, is flipping some of those assumptions on its head. This is about technology, particularly in autonomy, that is democratized, cheap, plentiful, based upon rapid advances in essentially commercial technology, but also capable of delivering lethal strike at a fraction of the cost. That's a challenge for the old powers. The first example, of course, was Ukraine, when Ukraine innovated rapidly to drive 2/3 of the Black Sea fleet to shore, sinking quite a bit of it, and still dominates the Black Sea. The Russians are nervous about coming out. A remarkable achievement for a nation that does not have a navy, and something we all had to pay attention to, and still do. The other lesson was the rapid speed of innovation on both sides, with the Ukrainian, Russian innovation and counter-innovation coming every few months. Software being replaced every 4 to 6 weeks, hardware being replaced every 2 months. That's not something our defense industries or defense ministries are comfortable with. They're going to have to learn how to be a bit more comfortable with speed, technology and tactics changing at that speed. Then the Houthis. And the Houthis were more of an example in the strategic use of technology and geography to present a real dilemma. Good work was done by Prosperity Guardian, by Aspides, by individual nations in confronting the Houthis. But if their long-term strategic goal was to divert 65% of global east-west shipping around Africa, they have done so, and they have continued to do so. This is a real challenge. It's hard to throw $1 million missiles at 2 to 10K drones. We've gotten smarter. We've learned how to use electronic warfare. We've learned how to use gunnery. The Italians used their guns, quite impressive. Jackie Fisher would have been pleased, the old, the forerunner of the dreadnought in the UK. But it still remains a challenge, and we don't fully have the answer to that yet. What's the result? The result is a new fragility in global trade. And this, again, is where the resilience of the international shipping community is paramount. We now have, with potential challenges around Taiwan, you'll recall the Lloyd's report saying that a blockade of Taiwan would be $5 to $55 trillion of global GDP, which I don't think any of our economies could survive, to the chilling effect in the Baltic, the flag of convenience and non-flag of convenience issue, the Houthis in the Red Sea. Africa remains the one safe trade route. To paraphrase the great film, The Untouchables, nice, safe trade route you've got there. Shame if anything were to happen to it. And that wouldn't be impossible. If you think about the strike ranges of the Somali pirates 15 years ago, those ranges around Africa are touchable, to paraphrase the film. So it's something to consider. We don't see that happening, but it's a risk, and we are looking at it. Ultimately, sitting from a perch in Marcom, I see certain parallels from what I know of the debates in the shipping community and the debates in the naval community. And I think it's worth it just for a moment and wrapping it up to explore that. First, we're both struggling in trying to find the balance between legacy structures, legacy systems, and innovation and new capability. How do you strike the balance? Do you restore your fleet to health first, then incorporate new technology? Do you decide to scrap part of your old fleet and to have the money to do it? These are big debates. There is embracing the speed of innovation, and for you, the speed of regulation, and for us, the speed of deception, which is also considerable. How quickly we can make our structures move, how agile and flexible they can be. They didn't have to be this flexible in the past, in the recent past. The Cold War was slower. Actually, deterrence theory depended on response times being slower. Tactics to adapt and embrace and counter that political economy of autonomy. This isn't just a military problem. I was with the International Association of Ports and Harbors in Rome in June, and an interesting debate was how they protect themselves from ever-increasing cyber attack, and the need for their speed and flexibility in responding to changing technology that's becoming more pernicious. Resilience for both of us, flexibility for both of us, and this goes to ship design, and maybe commercial ship design. What do we need in the future? In this particular threat environment. That is, I think, new. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's new for the shipping world, where in the past it would have been, it's a greenhouse question, it's an environment question, it's a fuel economy question. Now it might be a survivability question, too. And geopolitical play for commercial dynamics, in commercial dynamics, and commercial play in geopolitical conversations. It works both ways. We are paying more attention to the shipping world, the insurance world, the ports world than we ever have in the past at the NATO and national level, thinking about defense and security and protection. And I think from my conversations with some of you is that there's an awareness of that geopolitical dynamic in your bottom line that perhaps was not so blatant in the past. There, but not as strident as it is today. So I think that is also, that conversation, one reason I'm here, that conversation is very much worth having. And with that, I will stop. Thank you very much.
I'll come a bit closer. You were so far away. That's so interesting. Thank you so much. And I'm sure I speak for everyone here. You described it as a new fragility in global trade. Does that mean that the security situation is worse now than it used to be? The threats are bigger or harder to cope with?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. Okay, this is not global trade a la Napoleonic Wars. I think you could say that was greater in terms of direct military kinetic threats to shipping. But we went through a long period of time in the long Cold War pause where state-based threats to global shipping were minor, and private threats to global shipping were disorganized and relative. They were there, but they were relatively small. You had the Malacca Straits piracy of the turn of the century. And the Houthis, the Somalis were probably the bigger example of that. But now what you have is something we didn't have before, I think, which is the recognition that the dependence of the global economy on shipping can be weaponized. It can be leveraged. And there are a number of players who want to do that. And so I think in that respect, yeah, I think this is a more dangerous time. With the proviso, as I've said, very few, if any, of these actors, I would be so surprised if any of them are going to bring this above the threshold of escalation. They're not likely to do that. That won't help you if your ship is damaged, however. If it happens, if it's done in a way that nations say, tragic, but we're not going to be sending any missiles anytime soon.
You asked the question yourself, and I'd like to ask the same to you. Speaking about these over 300 or maybe more falsely flagged or maybe not flagged ships flagged at all, still in traffic, violating the law,
yep.
And no one seems to be able to do anything. How should one understand that?
One of the difficulties is that there's actually an honest debate about whose responsibility it is. It's actually, in my view, several actors' responsibility to deal with it. The flag states of convenience whose flags are being stolen, represented falsely, I would argue have at least a duty to track these things, and they do. But of course, they can't stop it. That would fall in the territory of the countries where these people sit, whether that's Bulgaria, whether that's the Cayman Islands, wherever that might be. Those states also have to be engaged enough and willing to pay a little bit of a political price to help shut this down. The tragedy is we might have to wait for the first major incident. I think we will act then, but it will be tragic if we have to wait for that first major incident.
And all the, by EU, blacklisted ships sailing in, even as nor fleet, nor shadow, nor Russian, I love that expression, but we can almost see them every day in the Baltics. Is that the lack of, I don't know, courage and willingness from the politician in this area to act?
To a degree, because the Kremlin have made it rather clear that they will now. We had the Jaguar incident where the Russians flew an inappropriate plane, inappropriately armed, to try to present a threat. When we stopped smiling, we recognized, however, they were trying to signal that even though the ship is not flagged Russian, interesting question of international law. To what extent did it become Russian if it had Russian escort by air? But nonetheless, they were saying, we take this seriously. Stop messing with our trade. All right. One option, just Jim thinking, if a ship is out there flying like an utterly false flag of convenience, carrying Russian oil, why are you interdicting it in the Baltic at all? Wait for it to get into the Med, where we have all the advantages.
But do you say we or in the sense the politicians, could act more determined here or do something more than they currently do?
I think it's a bell ringing the cat problem. This is something I think the nations in the West need to take collectively. That doesn't mean unanimity voting or anything, but it means that there needs to be a common stand saying we cannot tolerate so much of the global shipping world effectively not under control. Having a debate over lunch on this point, we forget now that the freedom of navigation, going back even to Grotius, the freedom of navigation presupposes a world of nation states governing it, not the other way around. So if the nation states are losing control of global shipping and there is uncontrollable, potentially very risky activity happening, because who knows if it's not flagged, we all need to do something about it.
You also spoke about the numerous incidents in the Baltics, which has sprung NATO allies into action with joint forces from several nations to tackle these sabotage. In what way does that inflict NATO's capabilities to act, or marine capabilities to act in, let's say, the Red Sea or Africa's Horn, or wherever shipping is threatened today?
It does to a degree, but less than you might think. One thing we absolutely wanted to do with Baltic Sentry was to try to ensure that the regional navies took as much ownership of that as possible. So most days, the ships out there doing that activity are from the region. Occasionally, we have these NATO standing forces involved as well. But we're trying to also preserve the standing forces for activity in the North Atlantic, in the Arctic, and elsewhere. So we're trying to preserve that capability. In terms of the other regions, it has not been that significant a draw over the spread of the operation.
But since the audience here and the shipping industry as a whole are working globally, would you say that, well, NATO will keep you safe in this area, but good luck if you go south of Africa's Horn? Weren't there to protect you?
Well, I was actually going to mention this earlier. It's sometimes misunderstood with NATO. We talk about an area of responsibility for NATO. You saw the boundaries of it. That's the area where NATO must act, not the area that it can act. We were in Afghanistan, after all. We fought the Somali pirates. It just takes a decision of all allies for NATO to take on a crisis management operation outside its area. It's not that it can't do it. It's just that the treaty binds us to act if an ally is attacked within that area. So we have more flexibility. Right now, one of the problems of our current situation with the Kremlin is that we have a lot on our plate right now as an organization. Now, nations and navies have the ability to act outside, and they have done. It didn't get a lot of press, but several months ago, the US Navy fought the largest, in terms of bombs dropped, the largest naval battle since World War II.
Say that again.
The largest naval battle since World War II.
Were you all aware of that? Well, of course, you knew everything about shipping. For me, it came as a surprise.
Against the Houthis, which led to their agreement to stop most of their attacks against shipping for a period of time. And now, of course, they have started it again. It's a question of metrics. My own view of that situation is the Houthis did get what they wanted. They've got trade just about what they want around Africa. And if it starts shifting back, they'll attack a few more ships. That's their equilibrium. It's not about fighting the U.S. Navy or the Royal Navy. It's about maintaining that equilibrium, because with that equilibrium comes their leverage.
Fine question. Looking at this picture of the globe and the global shipping, which also is necessary, even if we're only in a sort of crisis time, and we're going to talk about civil preparedness in a while. In that perspective, are you worried, or do we have sort of this situation under control? Will we be able to supply our countries to the extent we need?
I think we can, short of something catastrophic interrupting the east-west trade route around Africa, and short of an overt blockade of Taiwan. I think then bets would be off as to it wouldn't end all global trade, of course. There would still be robust, particularly intra-European, robust regional trade. But major shipping lanes could be shut down. Personally, I think that one thing that has protected that Africa route is that the major recipient of it is China. So there are certain friends you might not want to upset.
Would you say that legislators, policymakers have enough knowledge around these subjects and enough, I don't know, courage and will?
I think they are growing in knowledge. I think the answer a few years ago would have been no, they don't. A few months ago, not enough. Some things have changed. The U.S. has woken up. The U.S. government has woken up to their rather desperate situation as a non-producer of shipping. They're trying to turn that around as quickly as they can, but they're outmatched by the Chinese. What is the number? About 200 times to 1. So there's a real challenge on that. Where I think sometimes the knowledge is lacking is kind of the knowledge that's in this room, which is, yes, we understand these structural things, shipbuilding, and what about operations? What about the operational side of maritime security and its vulnerabilities that might be exploited and weaponized? That's where I think the commonality of a headquarters like Marcom and the shipping world exists, and that's why we have an outreach headquarters within us, the NATO Shipping Center, that tries to fuse the two perspectives.
Thank you so much, Professor Berger-John, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, it gave you something to think about, and maybe also for our last panel. I'm so curious to hear what their thoughts are upon this in speech by Mr. Berger-John. So please welcome the Chief of Royal Swedish Navy, Johan Norlén, County Governor of Västra Götaland and former Minister of Defense, Sten Tolgfors, and Carl-Johan Hagman, CEO of NYK Europe. Give them all a very warm welcome. So, please, I'd first just like to have a spontaneous reaction to James Bergeron and his opinion on global trade and the security situation. What's your immediate reaction, Johan?
Well, I had the distinct pleasure to hear Jim many times now since I took office here in the last 10 months. So I'm quite familiar to the picture he draws up and what he says. And I think that's really interesting to see and put out here, especially to you, to the shipping trade in Sweden. And
it's a rather grim picture.
Yes, it is, but I think it's also the true picture, actually. You need to understand the problem to solve it, and that is why he says that is why he presented it like he did.
Yeah.
So
we'll go into a possible solution in just a while, but I just want to hear some reactions from you as well. A new fragility of global trade and maybe a more uncertain or dangerous situation than before. That was what he said. What are your reactions, Sten?
Yes, you know, Göteborg was founded 400 years ago as Sweden's window to the world, to trade and international contacts. And since we joined NATO, West Sweden is also the window for NATO to the Nordic countries and to the Baltic Sea arena. So our importance regarding trade, international sea lines of communication and strategic flows has only been underlined. And I actually think we face a new maritime situation or environment in this part of Europe. And that's due to a combination of things. Many have been mentioned, but first of all, we have several sea-based wind farms incoming. And they will be highly productive. The first two will produce as much electricity.
You could go into that, but just want to hear a short reaction to what Bergeron said. We'll get back to the wind farms, etc. And Carl-Johan, what were your immediate reactions?
Yeah, I think the world is grim, but the world has been grim for centuries. The company I represent, NYK, we're a Japanese company. 1945, we had one vessel left out of a fleet of 1,500. So I think my takeaway from this is that the shipping industry is extremely resilient, despite everything that has happened. Our supermarkets are still filled with food, despite everything that has happened. Many of our companies, mine included, have had the best results ever in history. So yes, there's a security aspect, but our ability to show redundancy and to adapt, I think, is phenomenal and should be celebrated and recognized.
That's great. There's been some good positive energy from the very start. And speaking about what's asked for from the Swedish Marine when it comes to the NATO context, and of course, we're on the Western Sea now, and the Baltics is right around the corner. How much does that or influence your capabilities to work and act in other parts?
Well, that's a really good question. First of all, I would just add to what Jim told you earlier here about the Baltic activity we have right now ongoing in the Baltics, Baltic Century. I think one of the main benefits from that is what we are showing right now to the enemy is cohesion and how we operate together in accordance with so I would say that we use our assets much better together than we used to do, and that is one of the strengths. To answer your question more specifically, from the 7th of March 2024, when we became the 32nd member of the alliance, and also from the last defense bill 2024, the Royal Swedish Navy has a completely different role to play here. First, during the legacy, the period of non-alignment, we used to be in one area, in one direction, and one enemy to face. The only thing that remains is the enemy. He's still there. But we were the Royal Swedish Navy were dimensioned to treat that, to solve that problem, and also give the army time to mobilize. From the 7th of March 2024, that is all gone. Now, we are supposed to establish and maintain control in the whole area of what we call right now Baltic Sea region. And Baltic Sea region, well, for you there out there, is totally clear. It starts in the North Sea and goes to the east in the Gulf of Finland up to the Bay of Bothnia. And that is a huge, huge transition and an ambition from our political leaders to the Swedish Navy and the Swedish Armed Forces. So what I need to do now, that is, I conceptually understand that task. So I try to explain that, and it's also very important that that is a task that connects the civil shipping industry with the Royal Swedish Navy in this area. And what we need to do now is to develop the Navy accordingly to that task. So both in quantity, so we can be out there, present, because that is one of the main factors here, what the Baltic Century has shown us, but also quality-wise. So for instance, to give there an example, air defense. The NATO as a whole, the Sweden as a country, we don't have enough of it. So the next surface competence we are developing would have an extremely capable air defense in order to sustain and maintain the sea lines of communication from us to the east, to our Baltic friends, and also to Finland, but also from the east to the west. Because we need to have that clear for us. If that flows, it doesn't work, well, then we have a real problem, both economically, but also on the military side. So it's likewise. The two threats here, well, they are integrated.
You were into speaking about the story of Gothenburg as really being the core heart from not only Sweden's way out into the world, and also windmills and the way we have to secure our resilience. And given this start of so much more complex threats today, how would you describe our security situation from your perspective?
Well, first of all, it doesn't really matter where an international sea line of communication is cut off. Gothenburg is at the one end of an international sea line starting off in Asia, and that could be cut off if something happens in Taiwan, or the South China Sea, or by the Houthis and Yemen. It could also be cut off a lot closer to us. But when I see on the news that the Houthis have attacked a merchant ship, I know that the shipping to Gothenburg will take another 2 weeks. It's like an immediate local effect on an international issue. But I think our security is very much affected by the technological development that we just heard about. It is a new marine environment in our proximity, and that's a combination of different threats that we're actually starting just to see now. The hybrid threats. I would look very carefully into long-range standoff robots, for instance, attacking our infrastructure. Also, we talked about refineries before, but also the hybrid threats, the drones, for instance. And we're used to treat them as one is a military problem, other one is a civilian one. It's not. It's a threat to us and our economy, and also shipping, of course. I mean, the development of drones, aerial drones, sea surface drones, subsurface drones, that's a fundamental threat, I think, to infrastructure and shipping, and also energy, as I mentioned. So security policy is widely threatened by the development. Also, the shadow fleet. I will, as head of the civil defense in West Sweden, always treat an incident as a possible hybrid incident until I know that it's not. And we had several of those regarding Russian ships, or actual ships. We don't know who's really owning them. The crew can come from various countries, the officers from some other countries. It could be registered in one state, and we don't know who's really controlling, and often not what's on it. So I will always start by treating an incident as a possible hybrid threat until Johan or somebody else tells me you can stand down, because it's a new world.
Before entering to cyber threats, have you heard about the over 200 municipalities in Sweden were under cyber attacks just the other week, which really shut down so many systems? But staying with the sort of analog threats for a little while, Johan, you have a very tough experience with hijacked ships, with maybe the Galaxy leader back in 2023 being the most well-known. Could you give us some sort of insight of how it influenced the crew? Because ultimately, we're the one paying the price right then and right there.
No, but to exemplify what we've just spoken about, so I think it is great that our politicians are now investing more in the Navy, and we need a lot more Navy. That's sort of my starting point. The problem we have, of course, is that Sweden has never been more dependent on the Hormuz Sound than we are today. In the old days, oil went from Ust-Luga to Nynäshamn. Now, basically, we're taking gas from Qatar, at least into the US or EU space. Where is that protection? And then you bring up the Galaxy Leader, which I think is an excellent example. It's a car carrier that belonged to our company. It was taken by the Houthis. The crew were kept on board for 14.5 months. They were not allowed to leave the vessel. They had switched off the auxiliary generators, and you can imagine what the Saudi Arabian, this was in Hodeida, but sort of summer is. It was probably somewhere between 18 and 90 degrees Celsius, 14.5 months. Now, the interesting part is the Galaxy Leader had been in Sweden and discharged cars that we had bought. She was ballasting back to India, and the Houthis took her. So from my point of view, even though the industry is super resilient, a number of people are paying the price. And that's our 2.5 million seafarers who've been terrorized by a chat-chewing Somali guy in a dinghy. Now we're seeing supersonic, hypersonic, whatever missiles that we have to protect ourselves against. So the threat environment is completely different. In the old days, we had the US Navy. It's not there anymore. The Stena people, we had the Stena Imperial, was saved by the Royal Navy. Today, there's one frigate, HMS Lancaster. It's on its way back to Europe, and it's now going to be scrapped. The Royal Navy has 6 frigates. Sweden has 0. Just so we know what we're talking about, my company has 1,500 vessels. We transit well, let's take any body of water. Right now, the Suez is no good, but in the old days, we would have 40, 50 transits of the Suez every month. So the quantity of support, which I think is our ethical duty to our seafarers, is just simply not there. And that mismatch that we have disarmed, I would strongly argue that we're more globalized than ever, and making the governor's point, it doesn't matter where in the world this is, because we're thankfully one of the most trade-dependent nations on earth. Where is that capability? And I think there we're doing ourselves a disfavor.
So the threats are just as imminent today as when the Galaxy Leader was hijacked? Is that what you're saying? The situation is just as dangerous?
Well, if you are hijacked by, it doesn't really matter how you're hijacked. So just to give some pictures. So the crew members who had Israeli stamps in their passports, they had a revolver taped to their head, and you had mock executions every morning. Now, we've been doing that for 2 or 3 months. It doesn't really matter what the threat has been, but the outcome and the price our seafarers are paying. And it doesn't matter how many security guards we put on board. What we want is a gray vessel with a search radar and a helicopter. Then people take a sigh of relief and say, yes, I'm in safe hands. And I would then argue, Mr. Governor.
When listening to Carl Johan, what's your reaction? Is this, or could it be a task for the Swedish Navy? Is it even, well, is it realistic?
I think it is realistic. As I mentioned before, first of all, the task is at hand. We do have it right now in the area here. I would just emphasize that. But also by developing those capabilities I was talking about. You mentioned here, Carl-Johan, frigates. Well, we are just, I don't know why, but we are talking about really, really big corvettes here, but they are really, in fact, they are frigates. So by doing that, we are providing the nation with security and defense in that order. I would say policy means that Sweden hasn't had for 60, 70 years. So that means, and NATO has taught us that also there's a 360 perspective in the NATO, in the alliance. That means that today we see a lot of French and Italian support here in the area. A lot of it. You didn't mention the nations, but I can assure you that there are a lot of French and Italian frigates here in the area. And next time they might knock on the door and say, hey, we have the same problem here in the Meds. You need to be down there. And that is how NATO works. 360 perspective, we need to take our assets to help someone else.
But do you have the resources today?
Today, not.
Not
For
yet.
the region, yes. But in the future, in other ways, we can also help.
From a resilience and civil preparedness perspective, what do you think when the global shipping is as threatened as it is today? As you mentioned yourself, it's not just about the Red Sea. It could be starting anywhere.
Yeah. Let me add just a couple of perspectives. Combine this seminar with a former one on green transition. The development of the economy leads to an increase in seabed pipelines and cables, for instance. Those wind farms, new cables, or if you bring the energy ashore as hydrogen gas pipeline, internet, communications. So the seabed is increasingly important. So the sea arena, not only shipping, but also on the bottom on the seafloor. The sea arena is increasing highly, I think, in importance for security in a broader sense. The green transition, electricity, energy in many shapes and forms, will make Johan's job even more important in the long run. But let me just remind you that it's not too many years ago that we were active in Operation Atalanta, an EU-led operation in Gulf of Aden. There was also NATO operations at the same time, fighting those Somali pirates. So it all depends on what you agree with your allies and partners, what's most important to do. We had the capabilities. The Coast Guard was also there, with sea surveillance planes, for instance, and corvettes from Sweden. But the security situation in our proximity has changed. The ships could work, but we need them elsewhere. There's a different story now than it was at that time. Another perspective for everyone in here is also that the rules-based order of trade is under threat. So the conditions by which you make trade, tariffs, non-tariff barriers to trade, are rapidly changing. So the unpredictability is very, very high regarding trade, and that could possibly affect also the supply of merchant ships in the long run, or the will and intention to do international business. So I think that's important to have a rules-based international order for security, but also for trade itself, such as WTO.
You're pointing out a true and very complex reality that we all live in today. So what does that say about our resilience and civil preparedness? Because given all you've described, it seems quite complicated to make all the support chains run.
Yeah. To make your point, Sweden is one of the most trade-dependent countries in the world. About 50% of GDP is export, 40% is import. So to keep those flows running, even in the darkest of days, the darkest of times, is key to keeping the country afloat. So I look at the NATO membership that we have 4 tasks looking ahead. We must be able to receive military support intended for us or for other allied countries and transport them through the country, to the Baltics, for instance. We must be able to receive humanitarian support intended for us or other countries. We must be able to receive dead and wounded from frontal states and send them back, also to hospitals, for instance, the wounded ones. But we must simultaneously be able to uphold the strategic flows of goods and energy to keep the economy of Sweden, but not only Sweden. Gothenburg is the most important harbor for Norway, for instance, and key to Finland, to keep the economies running in the long run. So we have 4 major tasks looking ahead, and shipping is crucial to all 4.
What would you say about your need to cooperate with the civil part of shipping here, represented by Carl-Johan right now? All these tasks mentioned by Sten, where do you have to collaborate? And then what does that collaboration looks like today?
I would say that it has already started. For instance, we have right now, well, not right now, but we need to have, every 6 months, we have a battalion in Latvia. And how do we get there? We don't have a big rail ship to transport 1 battalion, so we do it by commercial shipping. And what we do in that is provide security for that transport, so we escort that transport over. That is one thing. I mentioned yesterday, but I think that is also vital to say here, we can't really look at the paper and just look at what we are supposed to do in a higher readiness. We need to do this now, today. And that's why it's so very important to be here, to say that, and that we are actually doing this today, actually. Even though in a small scale, we know the task, we know what we are supposed to do, We are developing our Navy accordingly to fulfill that task even better today, but it starts with conceptually really understand what we're supposed to do. We, Sweden, are at the end of a long, long supply chain if you look at NATO. It starts way back or way south from here, and it ends up here. And it doesn't really end, even though I know the governor would say that, just in Gothenburg. It ends in Baltic states, it ends in Finland, and on the east coast of Sweden, and maybe even down to Poland. So we need to understand the problem here. If we don't maintain that, well, I talked about the flows or the sea lines of communication because I love to hear that. Well, in the 35 years of my services, I've never been able to discuss this openly and so much, well, with the audience that really are preaching for the choir, as I said before, or as someone said before. But I think that today, the most important thing is that people starting really to understand that. And like Sten said, our mission, well, the Royal Swedish Navy's mission and task is actually well connected to all what you are doing in the civilian shipping here. And we need to address those problems we have together to understand it and also to be able to solve it.
And from your, yes, Carl-Johan.
I have to there has to be a deal here. And in my view, the deal is we pay tax. And because we pay tax, we need protection. And in all fairness, the corvettes are going to be delivered 2035. We need protection here and now. So, I mean, there's a complete dichotomy between the demands and our capabilities. On the other hand, we must lever what we have. Because we pay tax and because we are here, Sweden has some unbelievable capabilities. Stena, what do I know, 60, 70 RoPax vessels, each can carry a battalion. You can evacuate the Baltic states in 3 days, just if you have Annika Hult's number. Wallenius, 150 car carriers, that is more strategic lift capability than the rest of NATO has. These are human beings living in Sweden with that infrastructure. I represent here in this setting Northern Offshore Services. We have 100 vessels for offshore wind security stuff. Doesn't cost the taxpayer a penny. And we have these capabilities if we want to use them. However, I think we have $60,000 in GDP per capita in Sweden. We're 5 times richer than anybody else. And the Swedish Navy does not have one single vessel that can protect one single merchantman anywhere outside the Baltic Sea right now. And I just think we should do better. As one of the richest countries in the world, we need to support Admiral Norlén so he gets his ships much faster, and they need to be much bigger, and they need to be much more omnipresent, because that's why we pay taxes and that's why we're here. And what we're asking, I think, is we're providing resilience. What we're really asking for is arbetsmiljöskydd. Also, no normal human being would we're saying that we're problems recruiting people. No, I don't think we do. I think these are pretty cool jobs. They're very global. But in a recruiting campaign, so please come to shipping, but you have to count on that you're going to be locked up in a ship for 24 months and tortured as part of your profile. Most Swedish 25-year-olds say, I think I'll go for a land job instead. So I think we, for so many
might prefer to get into the military instead.
We need your support, guys.
But is this a reasonable demand, very vividly pictured, but
it's totally reasonable, but I advise you, and I openly invite you all to take those thoughts and put them into an article. And please do that before the 14th of November, because then the Swedish Armed Forces are going to place an advice for the government how to spend the increase in budget. So please do that before.
But you actually need the mission.
That is exactly what I need.
You would like to do it, but you need the orders.
I think someone else should to preach for the the blessed one here.
For the other one, okay. But Sten,
yes.
One laughs, but one thinks about the seriousty, what you really describe. It's a legitimate demand to work safely, even if you're a seafarer on the 7 seas, right?
Yes, and we do this together with allies.
But Carl-Johan doesn't have this support today, it doesn't exist.
No. I left politics. I know what we did back then. We participated in Operation Atalanta to do precisely this.
We still do.
Yeah, but what's for today is for the Admiral to comment, I think, on naval capabilities. But I would like to add something to what the Admiral said before about it's not ending here. The signal of communication is not ending in Gothenburg. I think we need to look at shipping together with the entire transport system. And we need to add capacity, resilience, and redundancy. I mean, the goods coming to Göteborg will then be going by railroad and by road to allied countries and to our country. And we need to do more to keep the entire system afloat, if I might use that term, even in the harshest of times. Because if somebody strikes, again, long-range standoff robots, for instance, or hybrid attacks directed at the transport system, it doesn't matter where you cut the line. We need to keep the entire line, an entire perspective when discussing this.
And how robust would you describe our transport system today?
I think we need to do more. And as I understand it, this is a commonly understood perspective also from the political side. We need to do more. And I think NATO might have that view as well, that all NATO states need to do more. And there's a change in perspective. I would also like to stress that a strong civil defense is raising the bar for war. You can look at the Ukraine. A strong military defense certainly refrains from a country attacking you. So does a strong civil defense. A strong society willing to defend itself with resilient structures, meaning it's not easily crossed, that deters an aggressor. So the more we do on strengthening security for shipping, but also for transports, and the better prepared we are as a nation, we will reduce the risk for ever going to war.
You say we need to do more, which almost everyone says in these kinds of discussions, probably because it's true. But have you spotted anything in particular, we say, yes, in this area, we're not that strong as we should be, or anything concrete?
I think we're on a journey, actually, on the civilian side. I think the military side started earlier, but the civilian side is well on its way. And I would say that the capability and capacity today is much better than it was a few years ago. So we're on the right track, but we need to do more. And some of the things we need to do is pretty costly, because if you want to strengthen the
what
redundancy...
do you have in mind?
Sorry?
What specifically are you thinking about, the costly ones?
If you want to strengthen the redundancy of a transport system, of course, we're talking billions. I mean, to add to railroad capabilities and road capabilities and ports and all of that. But I think it's a crucial thing to do long term.
Carl-Johan.
So in this new world, which is more complicated, and I think in relative terms we've become a lot smaller. We don't set the agenda, the shadow fleet. I mean, yes, we should stop it. On the other hand, who is we? 70% of the world's population live in countries that are not sanctioned, and who are we to stop a transport from China to India? I think we should, don't get me wrong, but if I'm a scrupulous ship owner in the Middle East, will I go for the Western IMO system, or will I go for the new system? The new system, I don't pay tax. The new system, I have no regulations. And there are a number of upsides. So I think we have to start playing the game to our advantage. The good news, guys, and that's why I just want to say something positive as well. And it was a previous panel, 40% of global shipping is controlled in Europe. Now, can you imagine the amount of Chinese ports that is? Can you imagine the amount of logistics companies in South America that is? Can you manage not really where the vessels are flagged or what crew they have, but where they're controlled, where sort of the CEO phones the captain and says, you turn 180 degrees because I need your ship over here.
Is that what you mean with playing the game to our advantage?
So I think both our politicians and our military should lever our relative strengths. One of our relative strengths was the operational dimension. We have the largest and the most successful shipping companies in the world are located in Europe. Now, how do we use that when we're playing a global game of Machiavellian influence that we haven't had to play in that arena? And I just encourage you that don't forget that we are here, and our small ask is that we protect our 2.5 million crew members, but with that comes a plethora of optionality that we're not using today. And therefore, I think we can do a lot more together, and we should be, because if not, it's the Chinese shipbuilding game, where it's sort of other games. But we control still an enormous amount of global logistics, ocean-borne transportation assets, and I think that should be part of that global equation.
Johan?
I think I think we touched upon it before, but I think it's worth saying once more is that we are not alone today. We are actually into one of the most powerful defense organizations ever created. And Jim was mentioning that under his commander, his chief, actually also mine today, in some extent. We have created something, a coordination role, what we call Commander Task Force Baltic. That is also, it's not just a military term, it's also an organization nowadays in Rostock, maybe in the future in Sweden, hopefully, that controlling this area, coordinating everything that we do here, not just the military efforts, but also what is on the surface. I remind you all that it's about 4,500 ships, AIS ships, and that is not including the smaller ones, at present 24/7, 365 in this area. This is a confined, contested and congested area, no doubt about it, and one of the most trafficked places in the world. So by using our assets together in a much more efficient way, we can actually, well, at least while we are developing and growing our capabilities, we can actually, or producing more ships, to be plain here, or to speak out, is actually to use them together in a better coordinated way. And by that also, like the ongoing activity right now we have, is also showing cohesion. And that is something our enemy doesn't really have. So it's not always grey ships, airplanes and soldiers and sailors, but we can also, by just showing up one German ship together with a Swedish one and a Finnish corvette, that is together, they don't really understand it, because for the enemy here, it's all NATO. And by doing that, we can actually push him board, controlling him much better than we used to do by ourselves.
But sometimes you don't even know who the enemy is. Sten mentioned cyber attacks and hybrid threats that one could guess or assume maybe comes from Russia, Iran before, or China maybe. But are we up to facing all these intertwined challenges at the same time? We talked about the marine, the whole, all the cables and everything happen under the surface. Totally new environments that we have to protect just to have a civil preparedness. Are we up for it?
I think we started to be, but I think you're absolutely pushing it really forward here to say that, okay, no, not 100%. But I think that you mentioned cyber, I would say space and information. There is no boundaries in those, never. Not in my domain as well. We don't like boundaries because they're okay. There is territorial waters, but there is no front line there. But still, that is all those domains, what we call domains, actually influencing everyone. If you press email and I send it to someone in the Air Force, well, I'm actually going from one domain to another. And this is something we need to actually start building up, creating a sense of urgency and also to understand what is the threat perspective today. Because attribution is one of the most difficult parts in this. How can we can't really attribute who's dragging the cable here, who's doing that, what is the cyber attack tomorrow and whatever. Last year was, I think, Coop, we couldn't really pay our goods in Stockholm for just 1 week. And that didn't create a chaos, but it certainly was a drawback for the society. And I think that we need to understand that this is the world. This is actually where civilian threats or whatever is mixed in a blur, and we can't really say what is what. And what we're trying to do now is actually to create that resilience in the society, both in civilian defense but at the military, so that we, in Sweden at least, have this total defense concept that we are quite famous about for.
Carl-Johan, how acute are these kind of threats for the shipping industry? Cyber threats or hybrid attacks?
I mean, of course they are serious, and we take them seriously. We spend an enormous amount of money and energy on them. But I think that sort of goes for society at large. I think in the previous panel, the point was made that Some disruption is not necessarily a bad thing for our industry from a profit point of view. I mean, for practical purposes, except for the Chinese, nota bene, the Red Sea is closed. Now, that consumes about 15% of global capacity. We can just reflect on the fact that tanker rates are very good, container rates have been extremely good. If we had added 15% capacity, that picture would have probably looked very, very different. So again, the industry is marvelous in the sense of its adaptability, and we do 20 knots, and if we have to go around South America because the Panama Canal doesn't have water, we'll do that, and seemingly supply chains work. So I think we are super resilient. However, since hundreds of years back, the dominating superpower has ensured that the unclos mare liberum type of principles have prevailed. I mean, if it wasn't the Spanish was a bad example, if it was the Dutch or the British or the Americans. And now we're in a different world. I mean, where are the good guys protecting us? And I think several of the speakers here have been, I mean, as we're looking at a new world order, we are simple trading people. And with the Stena Impero incident we had year 2019, when they've taken your crew, you have 25 of your colleagues that are taken by the Iranian Guard. 24 hours later, we had the next vessel. And our then foreign minister in Sweden says, we're going to fix this with non-military means. And we said, no. If we don't have a frigate 100 meters from us with marine sharpshooters and an anti-air missile system that protected us against the attack helicopter, we wouldn't go in. The Brits had it at the time, and 24 hours later, there was no disruption in the Hormuz for the next 5 years because somebody was willing to pay the price to uphold these principles. Today, who is that? And it's not the US Navy any longer, and it's certainly not the Royal Navy, regretfully. And therefore, and then it'll take some time, but as the richest country in the world, whether it's green transition or other things, the rich have to lead. And the fact that Sweden, in my view, should be doing a lot more, understanding not only the challenges, the immediate security challenges in the Baltic, but actually has a responsibility to protect the fantastic principle that Thomas spoke about. 73% of the world is governed by one single system. That's our waters under IMO. Who protects that system if it is not us?
I'm pretty convinced that Johan will do it exactly the moment he gets the order and has the boat, right? You sure will go and protect them if you have that order.
Well, I definitely already do. So, but good. Still, so.
Yeah. To close up, I'd just like to dig a little bit deeper into this kind of cyber threats that intertwine the civil and military society, which you were mentioning. How would you say our preparedness is in this area, and how much does it worry you that we almost daily hear about new cyber threats and hybrid attacks?
Yeah. If you want to close down the system of transportation, you don't need to blow up the railway. Just take out the IT system that is actually controlling and planning the transportation, right? And that goes for private companies, and that goes for also railway companies, for instance. Trucking, those who sell food, all companies, the planning systems. So I think it's a key factor to resilience to know. I had a book out in 2016 on NATO, and I talked about the milk bottle effect, or how do you scare a country in a couple of hours? Well, you take out the system planning for milk deliveries to stores, and immediately, in a few hours, you will have hundreds of thousands of scared families looking for milk for their children, and they won't find it. The trucks are still running, the stores are open, the farms are running, but you can't deliver. So, of course, IT is a key infrastructure also when it comes to resilience and society's resilience. But I think, so I pointed to the new technology like the drones, IT, of course, a new threat. Violence by proxies, we haven't talked so much about. On the international scene, it might be the Houthis being given advanced military technology from states. In our own country, it could be gang members given a bomb. So this threat scale is very complex today, very complex indeed. On the other hand, we are an advanced society, we're an open society, we're a democracy. In that sense, we're vulnerable, but that's also what makes us strong. You pointed to us being a rich country with a strong democracy. Those threatening us don't have that. Those threatening us are authoritarian, politically controlled. Yes, they can use entire resources of their society and economy to threaten us, but they can't develop. And I think that understanding of what we have in Europe, in North America, in the free world is so key for keeping the population so motivated to defend against anything and everything.
I think that'll be a terrific way of ending this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
My friends, we have reached the final of the very final end of this conversation. And to close the commercial and financing meeting of 2025, I'd like to welcome up Anders Hermansson from Swedish Shipping Association. And isn't he worth a warm welcome? So, Anders, well, what a great meeting. At least it feels like that. What's your immediate impressions?
Well, thank you. I think there's a lot of takeaways from the discussions we have had here today. And I think first the good discussion that we've actually had and how interlinked the different topics are. I think these are, at least for me, some of the really good parts that I take away, and how this industry meets to discuss different topics. Thinking about international trade, for example, this is surely of the heart and the essence for our industry that works, but also the discussion on the need to strengthen European competitiveness on this. And I think it's so good to hear that everyone seems aligned on this. The willingness to listen that we hear from, described from the politicians in this, I think it's important. And also the fact that it also lies a little bit in our own hands to roll up our sleeves, start to do the work and actually get going to increase our own competitiveness. Perhaps with a little push from Trump, I don't know, but we'll see. And if I look at the green transition, I mean, there are certainly a big talk about October, what will happen at IMO. Will we get an agreement or not? That's at least on top of my head, and I think it's for a lot of other people. We as an industry need the regulatory certainty, whether or not it's the EU regulations or the IMO regulations. We make huge investments. It cannot shift over time. It has to be resilient. But also, there's so much going on this. So the glass is rather half full than half empty, and we are quite good on our way on that. So I think that's also very good. And of course, security relates to trade, the green transition, and I think we all agree on the need to have the resources to protect shipping, whether or not it's here in our backyard in the Baltic, or if it's globally, and how dependent we are on it.
Well, I must say, after being a close encounter with the shipping industry for a whole day, I think of Karin Orsoles. There's a solution for everything. I think that's about sums up what the shipping industry is. But all of this couldn't have happened without the hard work of quite many people, right?
Yeah, and I would like to direct a thanks to all of you who have been involved in this. And first to all the panelists, and to you, Karin, for guiding us through the day, and for all the interesting discussion. So on behalf of Donsö Shipping Meet, give Karin a hand. And of course, to all of you who have listened during the day.
Yeah, it's all for you. Maybe I should give the hand. Well, this meeting is over, but so much still to look forward to. The great dinner tonight. But I know that right now you will all be asked to take this wonderful train down to the harbor, because there's going to be a baptizing ceremony. Am I right?
A naming ceremony.
Naming ceremony, sorry. Naming ceremony of a ship.
Yeah, of a ship.
Could you tell us something more about the ship? No.
No, we'll see when we get down there, because you all want to have the name, and you will find out down there.
Okay, intriguing. So thank you again so very much. Enjoy the evening and all the socializing and chit-chatting, ever so important, and the name giving. And take the train. Thank you.
Thank you.